The world of Sera has always known war. In the words of Chairman Prescott of the Coalition of Governments within the year of 14 AE, humans are no strangers to war. After all, we've been fighting for as long as we can remember. War is all we know. And that certainly is true. Of course, the most memorable war within this universe was the horrific one between the Serans and the Locust Horde after an event that was labelled as Emergence Day, which saw the death of 25% of the human population on this planet. The war was so memorable that it became the source of their new calendar used on a day-to-day basis, before E-Day and after E-Day. But what happened before and after this horrific war that devastated the planet of Sera? How did it all come about? Where did the Locusts come from, and how did the people of Sera turn into these chainsaw-wielding, mega buffed up soldiers? Well, in this very big episode, we will be exploring the full timeline of the Gears of War universe, from the very first documented part of their history to all of the battles they had experienced, as well as the stories of the iconic characters from Marcus Phoenix and Dom Santiago, Ty Calisto and Kate Diaz. And yes, we will be exploring Gears 4 and 5, because even if you didn't enjoy the story or characters within those games, they are canon and add to this full timeline. On top of that, when it gets to the game sections of the timeline, I will only do a brief summary of what happened in them to save time, otherwise this video will be overly long, but I won't miss out on the big plot points. The focus is more on the background of events and extended universe lore. So grab a drink, grab some snacks, and let's explore every major moment within the Gears of War timeline, before and after E-Day. To understand the full history of the Gears timeline, we have to first start at the planet of Sera itself. Sera is a planet just like Earth. It orbits the sun every year, with those years being 420 to 460 days long, depending on other factors, with each day lasting around 26 hours. It is said that this planet is also close neighbours to other planets and multiple moons. One planet of significant value is called Resea, which many people of Sera look to explain the creatures of the Locust, with some believing that is their planet of origin. Like on Earth, the environment and geography of Sera has allowed for life to prosper and have a variety of different ecosystems all across it, with few very large continuous land masses surrounded by the Serrano Ocean, as well as several small island chains. That said, its weather system is like Earth's, but on major steroids, with horrific weather hitting parts of the land such as razor hail, which is like shards of glass fallen from the sky, horrific frost that can rain massive shards of ice onto the land, and even lightning that can change the full chemical structure of sand into impressive looking pieces of debris across a wide open desert. These weather systems have been majorly affected due to the endless wars happening over the many years and the use of deadly substances, which has changed the biosphere. But that said, they were there from the start. They are just happening more regularly now and are more dramatic. With all that set up and the Serans now living on this rich in resources planet, they've come up with their own version of the seasons and their own month system. Instead of our Gregorian calendar, the January to December standard calendar a lot of countries use on planet Earth, the Serans use their own, which consists of the months Storm, Gale, Rise, Heat, Bloom, Reap, Harvest, Bounty, Frost, Sorrow, Thaw, and Broom to end the year. Each name gives you an idea as to what the weather and climate is like within those specific months. And with that basic lore behind the planet of Sera covered, we now venture into the early years of the Seran people, starting around the year 5000 BE. Not much is known during 5000 BE, sadly, although at this point in time nations had already been formed but were most likely pretty primitive. The only reason this is assumed is because around this time the Pelez nation formed an extremely simple voting system that involved pottery shards. How this worked is pretty unknown, however I'd imagine it was the person with the most pieces of pottery would be voted in, with each citizen putting in their own shard for the person they liked the most. Maybe the bigger the pottery shard, card, the bigger the vote. Who knows? But this was the first documented moment within Sera's history. A few thousand years later, probably around the 3000-2000 BE mark, came an extremely troubled time where the whole Sera planet was plunged into the Age of Armageddon, which almost shut down this whole timeline. This time saw a millennium-long conflict that almost completely destroyed the whole of Sera as we know it, and almost brought the human race to total destruction. This moved into a time known as the Silver Era, which lasted between the years of 980 BE and 480 BE. This Silver Era was a time where the Serans moved into sword and chariot-based warfare and was essentially seen in a similar light to the Middle Ages within our own timeline. During this time, two notable nations began founding their empires and rose to dominance. Those were the nations of Gorasnea and Kashkur, situated on the eastern central massif. Gorasnea was the first to start building up its nation around the year of 980 BE, with Kashkur not being far behind. As Gorasnea expanded out their original home, land grabbing more and more land, the Kashkur Empire was starting to prosper massively thanks to the silver mines they had within the southern regions of their land. To put it into perspective about where the nations in the modern Gears universe are at this point in time, the city of Ephyra was at this point in time just a small little village, and the Tiran people, essentially what all of our main characters are, were building up their walls with simple materials and manure, whilst Kashkur and Gorasnea were living in their massive castles. Because of how prosperous these silver mines were for the Kashkur Empire, a massive fortress known as the Anvil Gate was set up that was made to defend them and anyone venturing up their avant-garde pass. Upon the creation of this massive fortress, no other army ever got through the pass, and because of it, the Kashkur Empire and their silver mines continued to fund their lives and make them a force to be reckoned with. With that, the city of Avangard was also built up in the same area around Anvil Gate that was massively protected and was a statement of the Empire's overall success. By 480 BE, or at least around that time, Gorasnea joined the might of the Kashkur Empire as they became their own empire with a peak population of over 400 million citizens. Whilst these two pretty much ruled the lands of Sera, it wasn't until around the year of 130 BE where another war took place once again. This war was named the Archipelago War, but sadly, not much is known about what actually happened within this war, why it began, or who it was between. All that was known was that it involved two or more unknown parties, and it left several landscapes completely holed by artillery shells, destroying tons of forestry with it. It would seem, but it was not confirmed, that this was probably the first grand-scale war that involved modern-day weaponry as opposed to the swords and chariots that were being used within the Silver Era. Arguably, you could say that this Archipelago War was the start of the Serans' new way of life. Around this point in time, Tiras was on the rise, set up as a monarchy within Fort Reval. Its capital of Ephyra was still a small village, however, but that's not to say Tiras didn't thrive as its own unique kingdom. However, Tiras was sadly victim to attacks led by the Gorasnea Empire, as in the dead of night, invading Gorasni barbarians made it into their Fort Reval and went on to assassinate the king of their kingdom. This was a massive change for the people of Tiras, and a tragic one as well, but they continued on setting up their cities all over the Jacinto Plateau. Around the year of 117 BE, the last attempt to take the Avangard Pass was recorded by an army, but after this, no one else even attempted to take this part of the Kashkur army, probably realizing it was too heavily fortified and they would suffer massive losses if they even tried. After this final attempt on the Anvil Gate, humanity realized that their love for warfare was getting too ridiculous and they were getting close to utter destruction, especially after the Archipelago War. With this, all of the Serans agreed for a permanent time of peace, and with it entered the era known as the Age of Silence, or the Golden Age, where mankind rejected the concept of war completely. With this new mindset, humanity went into focusing on cultural ambitions, developing the arts, scientific endeavors, and essentially had a massive renaissance. The military was seeing fewer and fewer recruits, and ultimately it was being ruled out by all of the governments to make sure people's energy went into the quality of life and making up for thousands of years of conflict and bloodshed. For the people of Tiras during the era of silence, they would go on to change the way their whole society worked at that time, forming a new government that was called the House of Sovereigns, and because of that development saw a dramatic improvement in their society. That said, for pretty much every society there was a big worry about how crime would be punished and ruled out. Even though most agreed peace was the best option, not everyone would play the same game, unfortunately, and the protection of civil liberties was a big talking point in this time. But that was just a minor inconvenience during this time. The major talking point here was actually the growing energy problem going on Sera, as both hydrocarbon, petroleum, and nuclear fuel sources began to run out, making it a priority to find an alternative solution for how they could keep on living. This could have been another reason for why humanity went into this age of silence, as they desperately needed to work together to find a solution to this energy problem. Luckily, their problems were solved in the nick of time, sort of, as in the time of the era of silence, a well digging expedition uncovered a yellowish liquid that was originally believed to be utterly useless, but to the scientists, they were absolutely puzzled as to what this substance was. This liquid would be known as emulsion. It was unknown what this liquid was, but it had been located deep underground within the hollow for many years, with some believing it had existed on Sera before the rise of intelligent life and actually developed during prehistoric ages when the riftworms were active in creating the hollow itself. Despite researching this yellow liquid, the scientists didn't know what they could actually use it for. That was until one scientist known as Dr. Helen Cooper created a solution known as the light mass process, which turned it into an energy source and ultimately the solution to all of their problems. Not only did they find that it was a really good energy source, but it was in mass quantities below, and on top of that, it was a fully green source of energy, or so they originally thought anyway. With this discovery and the Serans' energy crisis now solved, they could finally embrace that time of renaissance, and the world entered their golden age, where their economy saw the largest boom ever in their existence. Industries grew massively now, utilizing the emulsion to power everything they needed, and because of it, jobs were available everywhere. It was the perfect time for the humans of Sera. Life was great, everyone was doing well, and their society was thriving. Well, almost everyone was doing well. Those who actually had the job of drilling and gathering up the emulsion were suffering from a new sickness that was causing them to have major breathing problems and shorten their lifespan by quite a lot. However, to the government and everyone else, these cases were very minor, and it was seen as a small price to pay for a prospering civilization, especially out within Kashgar and Pelez, who were massively profiting from the emulsion, setting themselves up as hotspots for gathering it. Between the years of around 117 BE to 80 BE, the people of Sera couldn't complain about their lives at all. Everything was great, and as mentioned, it really was a golden era for them all. But like all empires and civilizations that go through a peak era, that would all eventually come crumbling down, as others would want to take from one another and try and stand as the top dog. This all came to a head within the year of 80 BE, and more importantly, with the creation of the Coalition of Ordered Governments, otherwise known as the COG. Within Tiras, within this period of time, they were prospering as much as anyone, and at the same time were becoming a powerhouse for new ideas and philosophical debates. One man rose during this time, a contemporary philosopher who was worried about what would happen with this boost in wealth and new obsession with material goods. This socialist intellectual, Alexei Disipich, responded to these fears by releasing an anthology of political volumes that would become popularly known as the Austere Canon. Within this documentation, it would rule out what he would want from a society and how it could bring about a better world, highlighting the importance of order, faith, labor, diligence, loyalty, purity, honor, and humility. With these things put forward to the people of Tiras, this formed a new international order. However, not many agreed with this idea when it was made public. What it did do was form the creation of a minor political party, which allowed all of these traditional ideas to get on a public stage and evolve as an ideology. Eventually, the political party got the right people backing it, and with it, it became a dominant power in Tiras, eventually taking over political things as well as economy and military positions. nations. This was all thanks to the influential estates backing this ideology, producing charismatic politicians to spread the word of the austere canon to the Tyrian people. As politics began to change due to this new focus on the austere canon, the nation of Tyrus completely transformed as they went into a Renaissance period, which would help them massively into becoming an incredibly international powerhouse. As they set up the new empire, the royal dynasties of Tyrus went on to set up monumental metropoles, including the new capital of Ephyra, as well as the economic hub of Jacinto. On top of all of that, they were also able to set up larger military forces, whose members were extremely loyal and fierce, taking in all of the decrees of the austere canon and turned them into proud, formidable soldiers. But as these new changes started to take place within the Tyrus land, the population started to question the role of the monarchy within their society, which, despite the assassination of their king back in the day, was still going on, and now it was time for the people to question what they added to their new revolutionized land. As the population realized they ultimately added nothing, this led to the abolishment of this long-running institution and instead was replaced with a democratic government who were, funnily enough, still run by the former aristocracy, keeping it somewhat familiar still. Problems started emerging at this point, however, and this was all thanks to the emulsion which had become the backbone of everyone within Sera. Whilst the people of Tyrus would sit back and relax with the knowledge their whole economy was doing well thanks to their overwhelming hoard of it, other parts of the world were majorly suffering as they weren't able to grab any of it thanks to these larger nations storing it for themselves in their conquest years. This led to a huge inequality of finances and power, with a lot of smaller nations becoming desperate to try and even survive. This was shown as being true as the neighbouring countries of Kashkur and Vaskar had a huge divide between both of them. Kashkur supposedly owned 1/5 of the international emulsion reserves, and because of that, Vaskar became entirely dependent on Kashkuri's pipelines to make sure their society could continue. This was just one example of the many inequalities that happened all throughout the planet, and because of things like this, a lot of resentment happened within the smaller nations towards powerhouses like Kashkur and Tyrus. But despite ongoing polarization on the planet of Sera, Tyrus continued to grow, and because of that became one of, if not the biggest political powerhouses throughout all of the land. Not only did it house a ton of emulsion reserves, but it also had one of the most powerful militaries at its disposal that would protect all emulsion areas they could possibly have. With this power in mind, a charismatic statesman at the time, Nassar Embry, wanted to use that image of strength to bolster even more political and economic growth to his nation. His plan for this was to combine other nations' forces into one supranational military that was capable of taking out any and all threats that they might face, to make sure the nations remained in the status quo and kept their monopoly over the global emulsion supply. This proposition worked well with the other leaders of Kashkur, Sarfuth, Dushin, as well as the other leaders, later known as Allfathers within Tyrus, and with that agreed to combine their resources into a new socio-political collective. The nations inevitably came together to create the new organization known as the Coalition of Ordered Governments, and with it helped secure their nations as the most dominant on the planet of Sera. As the coalition had now been officially set up, the Allfathers went on to make sure that not only did this organization manage their economic goals, but they would also set up political acts that would help all of the nations who were a part of it. A new constitution was immediately set up and was called the Octus Canon, which established its system of government and political ideologies. Leaders from the nations who were part of this coalition would go on to serve within the Council of Sovereigns, which would allow them to all be a part of unanimous votes that would determine alliance policies as well as select an executive from among their ranks. The executive, also known as the chairman, wouldn't have much power, however. They would be used as a mediator between the various heads of state, as well as overseeing the implementation of their decisions. But at this point, the Coalition of Ordered Governments had officially been set up, combining socialist ideologies within their domestic policies, incorporating the original policies of the austere canon, as well as the ideas of the authoritarian culture of the Octus Canon, with the founding families of Tyrus still at the top of this new organized state. In the end, the lands run by the Cog were all run under a powerful combination of authoritarianism, industrialism, and the military, keeping everyone in their place and limiting their freedoms. With the cog now fully set up, many smaller nations started opposing their pretty controlling ideologies and policing of their lands, and started to rise up in an opposition to them. One of the main reasons for why the UIR set up was because they hated that some of the larger nations of the cog were hoarding all of Sera's emotion, leaving them without any for their people. Seeing this as totally unfair and pure greed, the Union of Independent Republics started their fight against the cog, triggering what was known as the Pendulum Wars that were to last for the next 79 years, plunging Sera into yet another era of warfare. With the Pendulum Wars now kicking off in the year 80 BE, the following year in 79 BE, a man of vital importance would go on to be born, one that would later in his life shape the whole world of Sera for the worse. In 79 BE, Niall Sampson was born within Ilima city, Tiris. His family were extremely prominent, and many knew the Sampson name, who were fiercely loyal to the cog and completely backed them in their ambitions during this period of war. Thanks to this upbringing, Niles also followed in suit and went on to be found out to be a true prodigy, incredibly intelligent and above all the other children, where he would eventually go on to study a vast array of subjects which included biology, genetics, medicine, pathology, virology, teratology, immunology, and toxicology, eventually graduating in all of them and becoming a doctor in genetic research. Before Niles could continue on in his life focusing on his work in genetics, the war was still raging on, and during the early war years between 79 BE and 53 BE, many believed this war would lead to the complete destruction of Sera and total annihilation. This was seen within the highest members of the cog during this time, as they knew they had to do something about this to either stop the world from ending or to silence the UIR for good. With this in mind, the higher ups within the cog ordered the construction of an elite bunker facility located out on the island of Azura. This was to house a lot of key members of the coalition, such as politicians, servicemen, scientists, artists, and celebrities who, if the world did come to an end, would go on to be moved out here to continue living as these people were seen as the best of society. With this ultimate goal in mind, the facility was designed to be a lavish resort, one people would love to live in. Amongst these individuals picked out to live here would be our scientist just mentioned, Dr. Niles Sampson, who was seen as one of the best minds in geneticism. However, Niles did not in the end move to Azura, as a more pressing issue arose during this point within the Pendulum Wars. At the midpoint of the war between the years of 52 BE and 27 BE, the sickness that the emotion miners had been getting much earlier in their history had gotten worse and was causing widespread lung conditions that were leading to many fatalities. This disease would finally go on to be named as rust lung and was a result of close proximity to the emotion fumes and liquid touching the skin, mainly in the emotion processing facilities, leading to not just miners losing their lives, but now the residents of the townships located there. Realizing this was going to have major political and economic problems due to the Seran people's main energy source now being confirmed to be toxic, the COG's Department of Health under Chairman Monroe's administration went on to open up the New Hope Research Facility to house the children of the miners who had been infected with rust lung, to try and study the disease and hopefully find a cure so they could go back to mining emotion once again and this rust lung disease wouldn't be a problem anymore. This is where Niles Sampson came into action. Instead of going to Azura, Niles travelled to this New Hope facility and became the director of it all. But the process for finding this cure was utterly barbaric. To try and find what was the cause and what could be the ultimate cure, the scientists here injected concentrated emulsion into the children on a daily basis, which saw immediate, horrible results where cells would undergo immediate stress, leading to metastasis and eventually death. For some of the children, however, infected cells underwent mutations that, if refined, were considered beneficial for genetic engineering. However, after countless tests, the scientists found that only one child out of all of them showed genetic immunity to rust lung. That child being known as Mira, and instead of being damaged by the emulsion, actually thrived from it, giving her many beneficial mutations such as decelerated aging and an enhanced immune system. Dr. Niles saw this as a major breakthrough, but this was just the start of it, and now his work had to branch out into transgenics. Niles sought to find another creature that was immune to the the effects of emulsion, and here look to the creatures down below within the hollow, more specifically the indigenous creatures living there. Here he would bring them up to the facility and splice the children there with the DNA of these creatures, thinking that would make them like Mira. However, Niles was wrong, as it only made the children worse, transforming them into heavily mutated, deformed, mindless creatures that he would go on to call the Sires. The only one to survive these horrific mutations was actually Patient Zero of Ruslan, called Ukkon, who retained his sanity after those gruesome transformations, but it had rendered him as sadistic and savage just like all the others. Both Mira and Ukkon in their transformations had gained the vital ability to heal wounds instantly when they were exposed to emulsion, which essentially made them immortal. With the scientists witnessing this, they realized they had a problem if they were to start attacking, so in an act of future planning, the scientists at New Hope designed a cytostatic gas that blocked Ukkon's regenerative abilities and made him vulnerable to attacks. After all of this, Niles realized that he did not want to focus on getting a cure for Ruslan anymore, as he had a new venture to follow. Now, he wanted to find a way to evolve the human race into a stronger, healthier, immortal species, even looking at the Sires as being potentially weapons for the Cog to use in their Pendulum War that they were still fighting desperately. That said, the Sires were a lost cause as they were too far gone and fully unstable, and worst of all, completely sterile, meaning they could not be used to create an independent species. That, and they also had been attacking the staff of New Hope in a series of violent attacks, making them too dangerous to even test on. With this, many of the staff abandoned their posts and resigned from working under Niles, trying to leak all of the details of what was going on within the labs, but Niles responded to this by silencing all of those leaks, eventually making all talk go silent. One guard at New Hope named Private Sid Redburn was actually a whistleblower and alerted Colonel Tolman to contact the chairman about what Niles was doing within this facility and how it was not working on a cure for Ruslan anymore. Instead, was creating barbaric creations. With this information, the Cog launched a formal investigation into New Hope and discovered that it had indeed been imprisoning children, torturing them, and putting them all through unethical experimentation like all the reports had stated. Niles tried desperately to talk to the chairman about the Sires and how they had military potential, but Monroe was having none of it and ordered the facility to be shut down completely, with all those involved to be indicted. With the closure of New Hope, Niles had to give up his years of research and hope of making a new evolved human to use in war, but to also progress humanity's future. However, his hopes of continuing his work did come to light as a small secret political cabal within the Cog liked what Dr. Niles was doing with his research, and around the year of 40 BE wanted to reach out to him to try and create those genetically enhanced soldiers for them to use within the Pendulum Wars to end it once and for all. With that, these members of the Cog relocated Niles and his remaining loyal employees, as well as many of their test subjects, to a new secret laboratory that they had drilled underground into Mount Kadar. Not all of the test subjects were taken with them, however, as some Sires were left back in their stasis tanks protected by the semi-sentient security system designed by Niles himself that was based off his own personality. With all that set up, New Hope was officially abandoned, with the Cog closing it and wiping out all documentation about what had happened there, trying to make sure that no one would ever hear about what had happened within. Before Niles got to Mount Kadar's secret facility, two other events happened within the timeline. The first happened within 41 BE, just before the closure of New Hope, where a baby Bernadetta Mataki, a future gear of the Cog and granny of Damon Baird, would be born on the island of Galangi in the South Islands, hailing from a Caucasian migrant. Here she would grow up on a beef farm and had one brother, Michael, but the two did not get along in the slightest, mainly due to the fact that Bernadetta was the one to inherit their full farm and not her brother. Regardless, this was her destiny in life. That was until she reached an age where she could use her sniping skills to good use and joined the Cog's military. The other event that happened was out within the Ostari front, which was seeing absolutely tons of trench warfare happening there. Not much was known about what exactly happened within this front, apart from the fact that the warfare was extremely hard fought, and Lieutenant Victor Hoffman would later in life go on to compare it to a battle we will explore later, known as the Siege of Anvil Gate. Back out within the Mount Kadar secret laboratories, Niles was allowed to work on everything to his heart's content. intent without any official cog eyes or rules put on him. His goal was now to try everything to make the sires fertile and overturn their instabilities, and with it attempted in vitro fertilization of sire DNA, but once again this was a failure as they formed into even more deformed creatures that ultimately died quickly. Mira had stayed with the scientists and had actually been groomed into being one herself, and with that used her embryonic stem cells with some of the sire DNA, which was a major breakthrough as it created a successful female hybrid that would be named the Matriarch. This creature was able to fully reproduce, and with it was able to create the first generation of drones that were to eventually form into the Locust Horde. Not only that, but because of them all being linked to Mira's genetics, all of the drones and ones created by the Matriarch were connected to her telepathically via a hive mind, which she was able to control, which ultimately fulfilled Niles' dream of creating a highly controllable army of perfect soldiers. Now with the Matriarch fully created and used to make new forms of life, it would go on to be stored inside a massive tank of cryptochromic fluid and connected to a brain scanning device so that Mira's bond with it could be studied by another scientist named Dr. Torres, who was one of the lab's best geneticists. But as this study went ahead, the two formed a romantic relationship with each other, and eventually the two conceived a child of their own, a fully human child named Reyna. Reyna was special as she had inherited many of her mother's genetic abilities, which importantly included the link to the Locust hive mind through her temporal lobe. Seeing this, Dr. Torres was fearful of what they would do to his daughter and the experiments she would be exposed to, and decided he had to escape the facility to save her. With that, he and Reyna made it out of the facility, with Niles desperately trying to catch them, but to no use. Instead of telling Mira what had happened, however, Niles would go on to lie to her, saying Reyna had been killed in the escape attempt in order to make sure Mira did not leave the facility to go looking for her. This loss of her daughter triggered the whole downfall of this facility, as Mira's maternal feelings spread into her other children of the Locust Horde, who were at this point in time feeling extremely trapped, wanting freedom, and felt like they were being tortured by the scientists around them. With Mira seeing what they were doing to her Locust children, she would use the Matriarch to convince the Locusts to rebel, in which they did. As they broke free from their control, the Locusts would utilize any tools and weapons they could find to slaughter all of the scientists and guards in their path. As the Locusts ventured forwards out of the facility, a fatally wounded Niles Samson downloaded his consciousness into a robot before triggering a full lockdown of the facility, utilizing cryogenic gas to freeze everything around them, including the still alive soldiers, Locusts, and scientists. Mira and her Locusts were able to escape and went down deeper into the caverns of Mount Kadar, setting themselves up in their new home within the Hollow, where their DNA originated from, with the native creatures living there. Now having their complete freedom, albeit without their Matriarch now, Mira would lead her Locust forces into a new age, focusing on rapid technological and cultural advancement, setting up their first city known as Nexus, where Queen Mira would rule her beloved children. For Dr. Niles, however, he would meet his end bleeding out, whilst making the rest of them freeze in a cold grave. With all of that happening under the noses of the Cog, the Pendulum Wars were still in full swing. Out within the Eastern Front during this time, a fierce group of Cog soldiers known as the Duke of Toland's regiment would go on to fight out within the Republic of Gorosnea. This battle seemingly did not go to plan, however, as many of this regiment would go on to be captured in battle and sent to the prisoner of war and forced labour camp in Ramasku. But when they were here, many of them went on to die due to horrific conditions and mistreatment at the hands of the guards, which went against everything the Gears stood for. It was completely dishonourable to kill prisoners, but here in the POW camps, the Duke of Toland's regiment were dying by the day. This led to massive mistrust of the Gorasni for what they had done during this time, and a real hatred towards them, especially for those who were close to this regiment. Around this time in the year of 22 BE, two familiar names would be born into this war-obsessed world, this being Marcus Phoenix, born to the Cog Major Adam Phoenix, and Carlos Santiago, both born out within Tiris in the 58th year of the Pendulum War. That following year, during the month of Broom, another Santiago would be born known as Dominic, who would be raised within the city of Ephyra, going on to attend the Olafsson Intermediate School, where he would eventually go on to make friends with Marcus Phoenix when he was just 8 years of age. Around that same time, Dom also started to take an interest in a girl named Maria, who had just moved into the area and often climbed a tree that Dom could see from his bedroom window. Dom knew he liked her, and after 5 years would actually go on to start dating her, making the two of them childhood sweethearts. Despite those happy tales of Dom, Maria and Marcus all meeting up and being childhood friends, for those fighting out within the Pendulum Wars, the year of 17 BE was one of the worst years for conflicts, as many major battles would take place. During this year, the nation of Vazgar was falling into a lot of trouble. Their president of the time, Ilm, was failing to keep the budget and the opposition party, the Unity Party, in balance, and this was leading to a vote of no confidence. At the same time, the nation was failing to pay its emulsion bills to a UIR nation just south of its border. Instead of facing this vote of no confidence, however, President Ilm went on to resign, knowing full well that he would have lost it. With him out of the way, the UIR nation under Chairman Veri sent in troops they claimed were peacekeepers and formed an interim government there. With these peacekeepers there, Vazgar turned into a staging ground for their larger plan, which was to attack the Kashkur nation and take its emulsion reserves. The Cogs saw what was going on here and immediately responded, planning to cut off Vazgar's emulsion supply completely, hoping that it would make it difficult for the UIR army to resupply. Vazgar's acting president during this time desperately tried to plead with the chairman of the Cog to get their energy back, but this was to fail as the Cog didn't want to hear anything about it. With war looking inevitable on the Kashkur front, the 6th Brigade of Cog troops under the command of James Choi jumped into action as he ordered Captain Adam Phoenix to go to Boar Lane and Ekium Ridge, get to the emulsion pipeline and either destroy it completely or shut it down, to then open the emergency pipeline at Gatka. Phoenix knew he would need engineers for this specific task, as well as guards for the pipeline in case the UIR forces had already breached Kashkur and were there waiting for them. Eventually, Phoenix briefed his loyal gears who were to be on this vital mission, including one Helena Stroud, and ultimately they were going to be responsible for Vazgar being without fuel, meaning hospitals and other vital places would be completely out of power, or at least running on emergency backup power. With that information, they set out on their goal, which would take 2 hours to fly to Boar Lane, but the emulsion company would be shocked to find out what was actually happening, as it would mean they would lose tons of revenue as well. With this happening, the UIR had no other option and had to launch their attack on the Kashkur nation to get their 1/5 supply of emulsion. But they didn't just attack on one front, instead launched multiple war parties into different sides of it. The first was within Shavad, a large city on the southwestern Kashkur border. As the UIR moved in to attack this part of the nation, Howard Company, now under the command of Captain Phoenix and Lieutenant Stroud, found themselves inside the back of the river. At this point, Phoenix was desperately requesting casualty evacuation for the wounded in his company, but was quickly told by Control that his unit was the flanking unit sent to help out the ones stuck in the center of the city and were not the ones taking major casualties. The ones at the center of the battle had lost tons of gears, and with it 5 turn helicopters during their own extractions. Control stated that if they were able to take out the Indies inside the city areas, they would be able to send a helicopter to extract his gears. With that, Felix led his troops into the city, which took longer than he expected due to heavy fire and shelling from the invading UIR forces. Once the gears reached the river, Elena told Phoenix that she believed the UIR had set up an observer in the museum on Gore Lane Square. If they had done that, Elena believed that these snipers were exposing all of the gears' plans and locations to the attacking forces. With that, Phoenix and Helena came up with a plan to take out this group of snipers by entering the 3rd story of the museum and rushing in utilizing a ladder and smoke grenades. Eventually, Phoenix was tasked with taking out a spotter that was indeed exposing all of the gears' locations, but it wasn't an easy task as they were going to lose 26 of the 90 gears under his leadership. Spotting where the snipers were fully located, Phoenix ordered Green FDC, a fire direction control unit, to fire upon the roof where the snipers were located. Whilst Phoenix and his unit did everything to try and take out this spotter and team of UIR killing his fellow gears, which in the end became a full success, the main unit of the 6th Brigade under Colonel Choi fought against massive waves of Indi tanks, artillery and missiles that were hitting the Shavad defense lines. Knowing there was only one way to stop this force, Choi's defenses would take out the last bridge within the city. But this plan did not go ahead as they failed to fully destroy the bridge, allowing for all the UIR tanks to progress into the city and ultimately win the Battle of Shavad. The COG had to retreat if they were to all survive, which did not sit right with them as they had lost way too many gears and equipment in the process. The other battle launched by the UIR was over within the infamous Anvil Gate, a location that no one had ever successfully taken over before in its history. The UIR's plan was simple. Whilst they opened up multiple fronts on the Kashkur nation, this group of UIR troops would charge in on the Anvil Gate head on. As the COG saw this group on the way to the gate, Lieutenant Hoffman and Private Padrick Sultan scouted the area around to see how much ground the Indies had to cross, with the assumption being that they would take extremely heavy losses from COG snipers and artillery from the gate. But the UIR had another plan, and that was to trap them from any Kashkur reserves by blowing up the gorge located between them, which they did. And in the words of Lieutenant Hoffman, the bastards have cut us off from the rest of Kashkur. Not only that, but the Indies had also bypassed a Vaskar police roadblock and were now heading straight towards them. Now on an observation post watching over the lands, Hoffman and Sanders watched as the UIR took a local refinery whilst the Anvil's guns started firing on them. But as they watched on, a single Indi RPG hit the post, killing several gears in the process, including Captain Sanders, and heavily wounding Hoffman, leaving him as the highest ranking officer at Anvil Gate. Now searching for the team or individual responsible for this attack on the post, Hoffman gave High Command a sit rep on everything going on, but Command had other issues, more specifically the heavy attack on Shavad. Because of this, HQ couldn't issue any further resources or gears except for a small group of 6 soldiers. For a good long while, the UIR were absolutely pounding the Anvil Gate with everything they could, utterly devastating the wall surrounding it with mortar fire, leaving giant holes in it. These endless attacks caused many civilians to die as they tried to get past Indi lines. But now with giant holes in the wall, the civilians were breaking in and stealing any resources they could, which would lead to Hoffman having to execute one civilian who had stolen food from them to feed his children. Hoffman had no other choice now. He could not last much longer here and opened up communications to finally surrender their ground, stating to the UIR that they could have the garrison if the civilian population would be allowed safe passage. General Kenneth Markham Amory, Chief of General Staff, also opened communication to Colonel James Choi at this same time, stating, "I can't do anything else to help Anvil Gate until we clear the UIR out of Kashkur. The pass must stay closed, and I can't lose any more aircraft there. The UIR has offered to allow the evacuation of civilians from Avangard if we withdraw from the garrison as well. They're quite elegant blackmailers, but I think the outcome is the same for the population either way." As the communication went out to the UIR about their surrender and the civilians were being prepared to be evacuated, Hoffman had all his men enter the wooden section of the city and were going to feed all of the buildings and garbage with emulsion. As the surrender signing took place, Captain Benoslaw of the 15th Furling Cavalry of the UIR were allowed passage into the fort, whilst all his men entered the wooden section of the city. Once in, Hoffman gave up his Lancer rifle in a sign of respect and that he truly surrendered, and took him further into the officers' quarters. Once they got there, a massive explosion ran out throughout all of the area, and the ceiling where they were collapsed with the beam hitting Benoslaw, killing his second in command. Now trapped under the beam, Hoffman watched as he squirmed on the floor for his pistol until Hoffman eventually shot him in the head, killing him once and for all. With their captain now out of action, Hoffman left the officers' quarters to find that the fort was in complete chaos as his gears opened fire on the burning UIR men in the buildings. Eventually, the new recruits of the 6 men alerted Hoffman that all of the Indies inside the city were fully defeated, and after this chaos, the newly created helicopter known as the King Raven came into contact with Hoffman to say that COG troopers were now on their way from both the east and the west, and within the next hour they would be fully relieved, bringing an end to a long bloody battle of Anvil Gate, ending in a way that, let's be honest, wasn't the most honourable win for the COG, but it was quite clear that they would do anything to defend their territories and their emulsion. The final battle was the Battle of Regani, which happened after the Battle of Shavad, where Captain Adam Phoenix and his gears were tasked in defending the city from 8 approaching Indy vehicles and ultimately keep the highway open for another regiment. As 4 of the APCs arrived at their location, Phoenix gave the order to open fire on the vehicles to catch it off guard, in which Corporal Collins would go on to fire an RPG at the lead APC, miss, then alerted all of the others to their position, where they would start firing on all of the gears and taking out part of the building they were in. Eventually, Collins took out the lead APC as well as another one, leading to the other 2 APCs retreating from the area. But Phoenix was confused as to why there were only 4 vehicles instead of the reported number of them, and with that contacted Colonel James Choi, who told him that the APCs were just a scouting party and at least 20 more were on their way, which included a few tanks. With that information, Phoenix and his gears started building up their defenses once again, with Helena Stroud making Molotov cocktails to use against the tanks. As the UIR forces finally arrived on the scene, the gears noticed they were being led by a pariah tank as it opened fire on their location, killing a few in the process. As the wounded were treated, Phoenix and Collins started making their way towards the tank to use their Molotovs on it. Stroud would continue the rest of the attack on the UIR armor, utilizing an RPG to take out part of the pariah's tracks and blocking the road they were using. As the explosion from the RPG went off, the smoke made it so Phoenix and Collins could move undercover and got to the tank to start dropping in the Molotovs and burning the crew inside of it. With their mission of taking the tank out, the gears retreated, but Phoenix was hit in the leg by a UIR machine gunner, but luckily survived as Collins carried him to safety. As they got back, Phoenix got his leg tended to, and at the same time backup had arrived on the scene and started destroying the remaining UIR vehicles, leading to yet another victory for the COG. As Phoenix's group of cogs started to leave the area heading to Lakar, he would go on to mull over an offer he was given to become the deputy director of the Defense Research Agency. This would in turn mean he would have to give up his role as major within the cog army, but after witnessing countless bloody and unnecessary battles in this horrific war, Adam Phoenix decided it was for the best, with convincing given by Stroud herself. In a quote from Phoenix himself, he would state regarding this career change, "And now we go and do it all over again. Another pointless battle, another bereaved family, another year of war, and the UIR does exactly the same. Someone has to break the cycle. Someone has to create powerful weapons so powerful that if politicians want to wage war, they'll face the same death as the men and women sent to fight it. A deterrent, a damn big deterrent. I can build a deterrent that'll bring governments to their senses. An orbital weapons system. That's my duty now." With that new career choice being made, Adam Phoenix started to develop the weapon that would go on to be named as the Hammer of Dawn. Despite Phoenix wanting to stop this pointless bloodshed, others still continued to fight in the Pendulum Wars. Victor Hoffman, for example, during this time, after surviving the siege of Anvil Gate, would lead a raid on a UIR radar station at Grelea in response to the UIR forces approaching the nation of Safirth from the Magar Pass. The goal of taking this station was so that air forces could be used to ambush them in their goals. Major Baxter allowed Hoffman to go ahead with this attack, but stated he and his gears were not to be captured at all. And with this agreed, Hoffman and his team of 5 headed out on their mission. This wasn't an easy task. They first had to cross the neutral nation of Marandey completely undetected if they were to launch their raid on Grelea. Luckily for them, utilizing a truck, they were able to cross the borders without problem, and finally the gears found themselves within the Republic of Luxi, where Grelea was located. Now just 5 kilometers from the station, the team went on to hide the truck out of sight and proceeded on foot through the forest, utilizing the cover of trees to scout the station to see what was going on there. As the team moved into position, one member known as Bai slit the throat of one of the guards near the radar pylons as the rest entered through the hole in the fence he had cut open. After dealing with the searchlights and making it to the other side, Hoffman ordered them to trigger the explosives even though they were still close to the base. As the explosion went off, taking out the station, the team were knocked through the air, but no one was luckily injured. With that, Hoffman contacted Control, informing them that his team had completed the mission and now they would remain radio silent until they returned back safely to Surfearth. On their way back, they were being tracked down by UIR patrols as well as helicopters, but Hoffman just stayed out of their sight and charged through the checkpoints, killing all of the guards in the process to make sure there were no witnesses. Eventually the team reached the town of Senio in Sarthuth, where Hoffman would make contact with them again. However, at the same time, the nation of Maranday would go on to lodge a formal complaint with the COG, accusing them of violating their neutrality. Colonel James Cho was furious with Hoffman and Baxter for launching this operation without his full approval. However, would go on to push that aside as his air forces were now able to fully ambush the UIR forces that were quickly approaching Sarthuth. Returning back to a more familiar face, when Marcus Phoenix was just 5 years of age, during the 62nd year of the Pendulum Wars, his mother Elaine Phoenix had started a brand new path of research based on the ancient Tyrian legend known as Romilly, a disobedient child that just wanted to be independent and was one day taken down into the Hollow by a 6-legged demon. With this research, Elaine would go on to find dead rock shrews, but when she would go on to dissect them, would discover they were something else entirely and had vestigial legs like the creatures from Romilly. Adam didn't really get her research, believing it was just a Tyrus legend and claiming it must be just a mutation, but Elaine confirmed it wasn't, and that she had found the last creatures belonging to a genus that had included much larger tunnel-dwelling creatures and actually discovered them near the Hollow whilst she was walking with Marcus. After rowing with Adam about her research and being close to the Hollow with Marcus, a place that was a heavily restricted area, Elaine would continue focusing on her research about the creatures down there, so much so that Marcus barely even saw her and started spending more time with the Santiago household. But as her research continued on, Elaine would make a miraculous and horrifying discovery when looking into the Hollow. She would not just see the native creatures there, she would witness the full Locust horde, as well as the other creatures that looked identical to them, but were glowing yellow all over. Witnessing this, Elaine would keep this a secret from both Adam and Marcus, believing it was better to stay silent about what she had just seen. In Broom of the year 9 BE, Elaine wanted to know more about what these creatures were and decided to venture down and make contact with the Locust horde within the tunnels near Ephyra. After that, she would reveal all that she had discovered to the wider public. But being completely ignorant of what these Locusts had been through and their temperament, when Elaine got close to the Locusts, they immediately killed her, leading to all those on the surface to declare her as missing. Eventually, Adam would go on to find her arm bones and scraps of fabric within the Hollow after following her research notes, and whilst her body wasn't fully found to confirm her death, it was pretty much determined that she had indeed been killed by the Locusts down below. Down within the Hollow, however, bigger problems were arising for the Locusts themselves, as the parasites of the emulsion were starting to take effect in the bodies of those affected by Rustslung, as well as the Locust creations. As time went on living underground, a lot of the creatures that were created or employed by the Locusts were becoming what was known as lambent, losing all of their sanity, growing into bright yellow explosive creatures and forming mutations all over their bodies. This became a major problem as those infected with the parasites started attacking the rest of the Locust horde, leading to a somewhat civil war between the two, as the infected individuals would kill those around them to spread the infection further. Eventually it became clear to the Locusts that the Lambent were planning to occupy their homeland of Nexus and kill and infect all within the Hollow, meaning they had to take a stand and fight back against them, which went on to trigger what was simply known as the Lambent War within 7 BE. The humans up on the surface were killing each other in their droves in a war over emulsion, and now down below, the Locusts were killing each other over the side effects of the emulsion. During this war, Queen Mira organized her army to fight the Lambent and ordered her chief scientist Ukkon to research the parasites and a potential cure for it. But as the war carried on, the Locusts were losing more and more territory, as well as their own troops who were either being killed off or infected and moved into the Lambent army. Queen Mira saw all of this happening to her kin and feared this would be the end of her civilization and they would become extinct at the hands of the Lambent. Mira at this point considered meeting with the humans to see if they could help her in their ultimate problem. However, fear of what the humans would make of the Locusts meant Mira decided against meeting with them, as she believed they would just try and control them or eradicate them from existence. With nothing else to go to, Mira had one choice, and that was to make plans to go up on the surface and colonize it for themselves to make sure they fully escaped the Lambent. The only problem initially with this plan was that it would mean the genocide of the entire human race for them to live up there. As Mira planned what she could do to save her kin, in the year of 4 BE, a strange encounter would occur as Adam Phoenix made his way down to the Hollow following his wife's research notes to find her body. When making his way down here, Queen Mira reached out to Adam and explained what the Locusts were going through with their war against the Lambent and how she planned to eventually take over the surface of Sera. Phoenix realized he had little choice in this matter and promised Mira that he would use all of the Cog's resources to cure the Lambency as long as it kept her people underground. With that promise made, Mira allowed Phoenix to observe the samples researched by Ukkon and kept in regular contact with him, which was unknown to the rest of the Locust Horde as well as humanity. But as much as Adam Phoenix wanted to genuinely help Mira, mainly due to the fear of seeing humanity be destroyed up on the surface by her Locust forces, the Cog needed him more to focus on the Hammer of Dawn weapon to end the human war between them and the UIR. That said, Phoenix's research did reveal that the Lambent, or more specifically the Emulsion, could easily evolve against any biological countermeasure and physical countermeasures such as radiation, and in turn would also kill all of the Locusts in the process, even if they hadn't turned to Lambent yet. Phoenix, speaking with Mira when he had a chance, said that he could only think of one solution to this problem, and that was by sinking the whole of Jacinto City to release a flood of seawater that killed everything within the Hollow. But Adam and Mira both agreed that the consequences were too great for either of them. After this discussion, Phoenix went back to trying to find a cure, but got too busy with the Hammer of Dawn research, leading Queen Mira to become overly resentful of humanity once again as she started her plans to invade the surface and create a new home for her Locust. In the month of Storm in the year 4 BE, Maria Flores and Dom Santiago would go on to reveal that they were expecting their first child together. This happy piece of news allowed the two to seal the deal as they got married that same month. At this same time, Marcus Phoenix, the son of Adam, decided through his own free will, most likely looking up to his father who served during the height of the Pendulum Wars, that he too was going to sign up to the Cog army. However, Adam was majorly opposed to this as he did not want him to get involved in pointless bloody wars against the UIR. But regardless, Marcus joined the Cog along with his good friend Carlos Santiago. Later that year, within the month of Frost, Dom and Maria's first child would go on to be born, named Benedicto Santiago, also known as Benny. It was named after the middle name of Dominic's older brother Carlos. This new child being brought into Dom's life changed the way he saw the world. He couldn't bear anything bad happening to his new family and knew if he were to help them survive, he had to take action, and in the month of Thor, signed up to serve within the Cog army alongside his brother Carlos and Marcus. Whilst all of that was going on, the UIR accused the Cog nation of Dushin of drilling under its border into the territory of the Akastu emulsion fields and stealing their emulsion. After this claim, the UIR sent in regular raids to stop this from happening, which then triggered the Cog to take their own action by sending in C Company of the 26th Royal Tyrant Infantry under the command of Major Helena Stroud to defend Akastu. As the Cog got to the location, a UIR Chimera would fly over the fields to scout the area and defences set up by them, which 2 days later was followed up by UIR Special Force units sneaking into Akastu and sabotaging the wells and pipelines. Here they placed explosives on them, but just before they were to blow them up, they would be discovered by a gear squad led by Corporal Maxon. Immediately a firefight ensued as the Cog called for reinforcements. Maxon would go on to be hit by Indy Fire, whilst Private Marcus Phoenix charged at them with the help of Private Carlos Santiago providing covering fire. Phoenix's charge was extremely successful as he took down 2 Indy troopers, with a pack horse helping him take out 3 more. But as this battle was going on, the UIR troops detonated the charges they had placed on the wells and retreated from Akastu. In response to this, Marcus Phoenix yelled out, "Shit, they've blown up the wells! They've blown the goddamn wells!" After this disaster, Maxon also died in the process, and firefighters were sent to put out the blaze at the emulsion wells. But luckily, they would go on to be repaired in just a few days, not affecting the production line at all. But this whole event would go on to be broadcast all over the news on the radio for everyone to hear. 1 week after the initial raid, Carlos would go on to patrol the base alongside Marcus and Private Quinn, where their radars would pick up UIR helicopters near the border and were told to be on full alert. Carlos stopped the vehicle and got out to see if they could see the Chimeras at all, with Quinn climbing up on the pipeline to see if he could get a better view. Whilst up there, however, an indie sniper watching over the fields would spot him and shoot him straight in the head, which shocked both Carlos and Marcus as they had witnessed their dear friend get obliterated within seconds. Whilst this was going on, another battle was raging over on Irama Island. Here, indie troopers would attack the main tribe's defenses, utilizing a ton of amphibious landers which completely overwhelmed the tribal forces who did not have the same technology. Eventually, the UIR reached the home village of Tai Kalisso and killed everyone in it, apart from him, as well as maiming those bodies. The 26th Royal Tyrant Infantry was sent in to fight the UIR on the island, with at least 15 gears being killed in the process. Whilst the COG engaged with the UIR, Tai, who was using guerrilla tactics on the UIR, was able to stalk and kill an entire enemy squad in a matter of seconds. As he stalked and killed the UIR, he would eventually reach his home village and then witness the horrors of what had happened to the people he loved living there. Consumed with grief and rage, he continued on killing enemy soldiers until he finally encountered Corporal Marcus Phoenix, who had come to the aid of the island. Seeing that Tai had nothing left and how fierce a fighter he was, Marcus offered Tai an opportunity to join the COG as a gear and get his revenge on the UIR, stating, "We're not saints, but we are gonna win this war, and I'd rather have you on the winning side," an offer that Tai accepted extremely quickly. In the end, the victory was given to the UIR as they successfully conducted their ethnic cleansing of the local population. However, the COG were able to evacuate from it. In the year of 3 BE, after over 70 years of fighting this horrific war, another incident happened at the Sarfuth-Marandey border. Once again, indie troopers started taking over Marandey to attack COG-owned emulsion pipelines within Sarfuth, then retreated back into the neutral nation. However, as the UIR started this plan, Carlos Santiago would go on to kill an indie saboteur who had placed an explosive device on the emulsion pipeline, meaning their planned attack was a failure, and once again COG claimed another victory, if you could even call it that anyway. The end of the war was coming, and it was clear that both sides were getting desperate at this point. During this time, the COG, who were creating their weapon of mass destruction known as the Hammer of Dawn, discovered that the Indies were also starting development of their own, and the plans for it were at Aspho Point. Knowing the Indies couldn't get their hands on it first, they were going to start plans to launch an attack on Aspho Point and capture the technology for themselves in what would be known as Operation Leveler, organised by Major Hoffman and Captain Mikkelsen of D Flotilla. Before that began, however, Dom and Maria would experience more happy news on the 14th of Broom 2BE as their daughter Sylvia Santiago was born, albeit prematurely. But that news wouldn't last long, as on the following day, the Battle of Aspho Fields, or Operation Leveler, would take place. The plan for this first launch was to, under the command of Major Hoffman, send in a small group of commandos as well as a volunteer team to land at Aspho Point by Beachhead, raid and capture the key scientists behind the technology, and then kill the remaining scientists who were of no use anymore. The attack went exactly as planned, as they gathered all of the data needed, killed the Indies, and made their escape via Marlin attack boats that were to be picked up by Sea Ravens. However, 2 Chimera attack choppers from the UIR caught up to the boats and were able to shoot down one of them. The gears in the other boat, however, were lucky enough to take out one of the choppers, but the other one remained and was quickly heading back to take out the rest. During this same time, another attack was happening north of Aspho Point as a diversion attack. The COG command unit went on to find that the UIR had another backup of the hammer data in another location. With this new information, the COG carrier Merit went on to send 2 Petrel fighter bombers to deal with the backup data. However, both of them were shot down by UIR, AA and ASP armoured cavalry units. C Company Company, now under the control of Major Stroud, Sergeant Keenan, and Sergeant Mataki, ordered an attack on the advancing UIR forces with long-range and long-spear RPGs, which would go on to destroy several gun placements and took out some of the anti-air units. This specific battle would go on to be won by the COG, however more UIR troops were stationed just out of range past the bridge and started their own attack on C Company, who were running out of long spears at this point. Within seconds of the UIR attacking, 20 gears from C Company as well as Sergeant Keenan would be taken out. This triggered a response in Marcus Phoenix and Carlos Santiago, who launched their own charge on the UIR forces with their own long spears and were able to take out several artillery units. Major Stroud, however, would go on to target one of the ASP's chassis by getting close to it and throwing a grenade just inside of it. However, as she did that, her weapon would get stuck within its chassis and she would be unable to get away. The ASP would ultimately be taken out, however it came at the cost of Major Stroud's life. One ASP remained, however, which made the COG's evacuation attempt difficult. It needed to be taken out, and that responsibility fell onto Marcus and Carlos, who were initially able to ambush it, but unfortunately it would fail. But despite that, the charge continued, led by Carlos and 2 other gears. But in their final attempt to take the ASP, the 2 gears following Carlos would be killed in the attack, with Carlos majorly injured, but instead of telling anyone, hides the severity of it from Marcus to make sure he didn't risk his life to come and save him. Instead, Marcus would go on to commandeer the ASP for himself and used it to knock out the remaining UIR anti-air and covered the withdrawing commando team from the Chimera attack copters, taking out the second one that was targeting the boats. Seeing the survivors of the first boat that was taken out in the water, Dom Santiago would go on to dive into the water and pull all of the survivors back on board a working boat and piloted it back into the cargo bay of the Sea Raven, an incredibly difficult task that earned him an Embry Star, a medal issued to all COG soldiers who did an act of true heroism. With the battle pretty much over and done with, a COG victory assured, they now had all of the Hammer of Dawn data safely in their hands, and C Company were now free to fully withdraw from Aspho Fields. Carlos, however, was too weak to be extracted, located up on the bridge with his abdomen with a major wound within it. On the radio, he contacted both Marcus and Mataki to leave him as he was too badly wounded to save. But as Marcus prepared to rush and get him from the bridge, another UIR mortar heavily wounded him, leaving him in utter agony. Mataki was prepared to end Carlos's suffering once and for all, but Marcus was still adamant that he could save him. But as the two debated on what to do, Carlos went on to pull the pin of his grenade, killing himself in the process to make sure the other two did not risk their lives for him. After the battle was over, the survivors were all brought aboard the fleet and went back to COG territory. A few weeks after this attack, Marcus, Dom, and now Colonel Hoffman were all awarded the highest decoration possible in the COG army, the Embry Star, for acts of heroism in service. Carlos and Major Helena Stroud were also posthumously awarded the Embry Star as well, with Lieutenant Anya Stroud, Helena's daughter, accepting the reward for her, and Carlos's parents accepting his. With one of the most significant battles of the Pendulum Wars now over, with a major COG victory, Adam Phoenix was free to perfect the work on the Hammer of Dawn weapon, despite massively objecting to the killing of UIR scientists at Aspho Fields. On the turning of the era where the calendar went to 0 BE, the Hammer of Dawn was completed once and for all, made possible thanks to Adam Phoenix. On its creation, the military used it on the Garandana test ranges, an island off the coast of Tyrus. Here they would fire 2 low-intensity beams at a mock town on the island. Showing what it was able to do, the COG didn't wait around and said it should be used at the Battle of Bomberg, where the UIR was destroying the COG army occupying the city. Before the Hammer was used, however, the COG gave them one more chance to surrender, but the UIR didn't, and because of it, the Hammer was launched, destroying 4 Indie ships within seconds, forcing the UIR to withdraw quickly. Seeing this weapon being unleashed on their forces sent shockwaves all over the UIR, as their premier Yuri Deschenko knew he had to get to the negotiation table or his people would be utterly destroyed. As he went to the negotiation, the war finally came to an end after 79 39 years of fighting. Although the announcement wasn't believed by some of the Furlin units, who believed it was just a propaganda trick and continued fighting within the ruins of Gato City on the 32nd of Bloom. The same with the Gorasni High Council, who vowed to continue fighting, but for pretty much everyone else, the fighting had come to an end all over Sera. Because of his creation, Adam Phoenix was awarded the Octus Medal for everything he had done to bring about peace. For the UIR, it was extremely close to being their victory, as they had launched multiple Hammer of Dawn satellites and targeting beacons ready to take action. However, their command decided it was finally time to end the war, as they had no passion for killing each other with these horrific weapons. The last recorded battle of the Pendulum Wars was within the Furling Cliffside, which featured Lieutenant Preston and Sergeant Marcus Phoenix. This happened when the armistice was announced on the 11th of Reap, and whilst the Gears here celebrated, the UIR troops who didn't want to surrender hit them hard from the mountain entrenchments, killing several of them. Preston and Phoenix engaged the Indies, but their town was hit with several mortar shells, damaging several buildings in the process. Desperate to end the senseless fighting, the COG reached out to the UIR major in charge of the attack to work out a way of getting the ceasefire to take place until the official one did. Luckily, the major got the order from his higher-ups during this time and ordered all of his men to stand down, and 3 hours after this led his men down from the mountains to surrender in front of all of the Gears. On the 14th, a similar response happened within the OZP-11, a UIR cosmodrome built in Vazgar to launch Hammer of Dawn satellites. Within this station, Gorasni troops mutinied here, and despite only being 200 in number, made a lot of leeway against the 3,000 strong UIR at the garrison. But despite making their way through everything, they were unsuccessful in their mutiny, as the base's commander bricked the OZP-11 system with a computer virus. On top of this, the UIR told the COG of what was happening within their base, and in response to the reports, the COG fired a light mass missile at it from Azura. A light mass missile essentially being another form of weapon of mass destruction, utilizing emulsion for its power. It was the second most deadly weapon in the COG's arsenal after the new Hammer of Dawn. This missile struck the cosmonaut training facility's parking lot, whilst the mutinying troops fought inside of it, trying desperately to claim the targeting beacons, killing most of them in the process. The major leading the mutineers, Garon Paddock, would go on to be badly burnt by the blast and unable to continue leading what remained of his men, which brought about the end to the mutiny and finally brought about the true armistice that was meant to have happened a few weeks back. After this attack on the facility, the OZP-11 would go on to be abandoned and remained untouched for decades. Humanity had finally relaxed, the Pendulum War had ended, the COG were victorious. Once again, this could be a time of peace and prosperity, a new golden age. However, as humanity relaxed, Queen Mira finally had had enough, and it was time for her to take matters into her own hands, escape the Lambent, and make the surface their own. One of her own, named Vold Ram, also had the same desires as Mira and spoke with her about it all, trying to start a coup against the Mira's Uzul Shrak. Showing that he had the same desires as his queen, Ram would go on to kill Shrak in a bloody way and take his role of Uzul, and together as one with Mira, started planning their emergence. The plan was simple. They were to strike at all of the major cities up on Sera, especially capital cities that had large substantial militaries and industrial involvements. The troops would be assigned roles as well. Cedars would go on to be used to ink the skies, with Nemesis creating krill storms, allowing the krill to kill all humans in the city during the daylight. After all of the people of those cities had been killed, the Locust would be able to fully occupy it and strip it of all its resources and weapons. With the plan all conceived, the Locust, 6 weeks after the signing of the peace treaty between the COG and the UIR, launched their attack on the surface, emerging on all of the major cities on the surface in a surprise, coordinated, full-scale, all-out assault. Everyone was a target. The Locust couldn't care less about who the people were, what age they were, or anything. Everyone was to die, and quickly, with one of the first person to be recorded as killed by the Locust being Sergeant Will Carmine, the eldest brother of Anthony, Benjamin, and Clayton Carmine. Yanamont Tiris, which held the large army base within the city, was the first city to be attacked, personally led by Urzil Ram and Cantus Scourge. This went extremely fast as Yanamont was completely eradicated and the Locusts started taking over its facilities. The capital of Tiris, Ephyra, was also victim to these attacks, being utterly devastated by the Horde. However, for the Jacinto Plateau, and namely Jacinto City, this would be spared thanks to the natural bedrock of granite, stopping the Locusts from venturing up there. Ephyra wasn't all doom and gloom, however. Luckily, the COG were able to fill the subway and sewage tunnels with gas and cement, blocking off the Locust attacks for the time being. Luckily for some of the other locations on Sera, they would also be spared due to their natural defenses. The South Islands and the lesser island chains, including Vectors and Azura, were among those not hit at all, as they all had Absol trenches and it would be difficult digging under the oceans. Those that fell, however, were outside of the Jacinto Plateau, like the Republic of Gorisnea, which fell to Zamil Khan. As these attacks ran out all over Sera, the media broadcast what was going on to all of the survivors, with both the CNS and SNC showing pictures of what had happened, stating, "These images are from our affiliate in Ephyra just a few minutes ago. Similar attacks are reported all across the world. Eyewitnesses attest these monsters strike from underground without any warning. COG forces are waging a valiant defense. However, emergency response services are completely overwhelmed. Some may ask, could this be the end of the world?" Many did not believe these images, believing they were just propaganda for a new war the COG was starting. However, this was then followed up by Chairman Thomas Daliel, who also made a public statement to his people, which stated, "Citizens, we don't know what these creatures are, other than the fact they are not human. We don't know where they come from, we don't know what they want, but they are tunneling under our cities and emerging to slaughter our people. Our combined forces throughout Sera have been mobilized to deal with them. I ask you all to remain calm, as you have done through so many years of war. Stay in your homes unless ordered to evacuate, and listen for emergency information on all broadcast stations. That, my fellow citizens, is all I can tell you until the situation becomes clearer." Not long after the first breach on E-Day, casualties were at a record high, bigger than it ever was before, going into the billions. More specifically, 25% of the entire human race would be killed in the initial onslaught of the Locust Horde. Not only were billions dead, but millions were also declared missing, either lost in the chaos, corpses not found, or many being captured by the Horde themselves. Tragically for Dom Santiago, he was going to lose both of his children, who would be lost in the E-Day attack, being taken down into an e-hole, meaning Dom could never retrieve their bodies or lay them to rest back where Maria's parents were buried. Helplessly on the back foot, the COG had to take action, and after Chairman Thomas Daliel's speech, the entire COG military mobilized all of their forces, resources, and other assets, sending them to the cities affected to battle with the Locust. The 25th Sheriff Cavalry was called back from their leave along with many other units, and luckily, thanks to their sheer strength, were able to secure most of Tiris. For all of the others, they did not have the military power to keep things under control, as the Locusts were taking out the humans faster than they could act. 3 days after E-Day and the start of the Locust War, gear recruitment started to rise. This was helped a lot thanks to the famous Thrashball star of the time named Augustus Cole, who went on to join up with the COG himself to fight back against these horrifying creatures. This decision by Augustus Cole saw a massive boost in recruitment, as people wanted to fight like their favorite star, and also saw that if he was able to stand up and fight, they could as well. Within the month of harvest of that first year of the Locust War, the first big battle would take place, named the Battle of Kinner Lake. Here the 4th Ephyra Light Infantry, made up mostly of brand new recruits, were to be inserted into the heart of Kinner Lake City to stop the advancing Locust forces. Thousands of gears were already here when they arrived, trying desperately to defend it with their Centaur tanks and APCs. A newly drafted gear under the name of Damon Baird and Augustus Cole would see their first action here within the city. Baird was technically donated from Bravo Company, and because of that, Cole saw him as his responsibility to protect, as no one else seemed to care for him. As the gears were ready to take off on their King Ravens, their Sergeant Iredale made sure that every gear was wearing their helmet ready for takeoff. As the King Ravens landed in front of the mall district in the city where the troops were being assembled, E-holes opened up immediately within the plaza, and the cogs opened fire on anything that emerged from them, with the tanks backing them up. During this fight, Cole found himself in trouble as a drone stood ready to kill him, but Baird went on to kill the drone, and because of it, the two formed a close friendship, sticking by each other's side throughout the whole of the war. Later into the next month, Baird would find himself involved in another mission against the Locust within the destruction of Halvo Bay. This whole story, and sorry to break the immersion for a second, is the overall plot of the game named Gears of War Judgement, and to summarize what happened here, Halvo Bay was the location within Tyrus that was hit with a 3-month-long battle that saw the destruction of pretty much everything there. This battle was fought using Onyx Guards, an elite Secret Service group of gears, as well as regular gears under the leadership of Ezra Loomis, who were fighting against the Locust of General Khan. Khan had been known for the successful attack on Gorosnaya on E-Day. As the battle began, evacuation of all citizens became priority for the gears, but when most of the population had been wiped out in the attacks, the gears just had to try everything to defend the city and the airport that was being used for all of the evacuations. Multiple high-ranking COG soldiers would die during all of this, trying to save civilians and just generally being caught up in the chaos, all whilst the military parade celebration decorations from the end of the Pendulum Wars hung out in the streets of Old Town. In the end, the gears trying to save the civilians would all be killed in the process, leaving only a handful of civilians surviving and hiding from the Locust on the rooftops. After many horrific attacks on Halvo Bay and its facilities, Kilo Squad, consisting of Lieutenant Damon Baird, Privates Augustus Cole, Garen Paddock, and Onyx Guard Cadet Sophia Hendrick would try and take matters into their own hands after being cut off from control. Here they planned on taking out General Zamil Khan himself, utilizing an unauthorized light mass missile, dropping it directly on him. Colonel Loomis majorly objected to Baird's plans, but Baird was adamant it was the only way to save the people in Halvo Bay. Loomis, however, threatened Baird, saying he would be tried and shot, but then, ignoring that threat, Baird, convinced by Hendrick, Cole, and Paddock, launched the light mass missile. With the missile launched, it would go on to directly hit the Museum of Military Glory, turning it into a gigantic crater and killing thousands of Locust troops, as well as Zamil Khan and the Shibboleth. As a result, Sergeant Phoenix and his men within Omega 2 were now safe, albeit a little affected by the blast. Although it wasn't over, Baird and his Kilo Squad had to answer to Colonel Loomis for disobeying orders and setting off a light mass missile they had no authority to use. This resulted in the trial of Kilo Squad, which was a hearing to essentially have the squad executed. However, after hearing all of their tales about what had happened within the attack, Loomis was almost swayed by Baird, saying if Khan had taken Halvo Bay, they wouldn't have been able to save anyone, but still went ahead with the execution plan, having them all killed with his Bulltok pistol. As Loomis got into position to perform the execution, the Locust burst into the courtroom, not for the first time however, as they had been interrupting throughout. But during this attack, Loomis was grabbed by a Locust drone and used as a meat shield. Paddock, holding a sniper, hesitated at who to shoot, the Grub or the Colonel, but instead chose to save Loomis and make an escape after. Now teaming up with Loomis, who initially left them for dead in the courthouse after being saved by Paddock, they would uncover that Khan had somehow survived the light mass missile and destroyed the King Raven Kilo were escaping with. Working together, Kilo would go on to kill Khan's mount Shibboleth, with Loomis finishing off a heavily injured Khan with his pistol. With their mission finally over, Loomis decided he was going to drop all of their charges. The only thing that was going to change, however, was that Baird would be demoted to private and that he would never be an officer ever again. Baird decided he was okay with this judgment and accepted being a private once again. With the Battle of Halvo Bay now over, the Locust forces retreated from the city, realizing they had no leader to guide them, and with them gone, COG Engineering Corps went in to reclaim the city and search for all the missing people lost in the attack. In 1 AE, the Battle of Kaya Island began. Within Kaya, the Locusts were able to find a way to fully tunnel underneath the ocean and hit it hard. The nearest island that could help was Galangi Island, which unfortunately was 2,000 kilometers away from it. The COG took immediate action and sent in their gears to try and evacuate as many people from the island as possible, whilst the Locusts sent their elite troops known as corpses. Whilst the gears put up a good fight, the corpses would literally run over their armoured vehicles that went to help the COG take them out. Overall, the battle was a disaster for the COG, but they were able to evacuate most of the population up to the north. But for Galangi Island, due to this event, they were now fully cut off from the rest of Sera and had to somehow deal with everything on their own. Clearly the stress was getting to the high command of the COG, as in the month of Rise, Chairman Thomas Daliel would go on to die from a cardiac arrest. This meant the position was now open for a new leader and someone who could guide people into the next stage of the Locust War. Here within the House of Sovereigns, they were going to elect the next chairman, that being Richard Prescott. In the month of Bloom in that year, the Battle of Bonberg would go on to be publicly broadcast on all COG media outlets, which would show the horrors of the Locusts as they were seen butchering innocent civilians. This whole event shocked the people of Sera so much that many, including Margaret Hoffman, the wife of Colonel Victor Hoffman, thought that suicide would be the better option. On the 30th of that same month, the Austrian Republic would find themselves fully leaderless as their premier Yuri Deschenko fled to Pelez, meaning Austria was going to fall. The fall of Austria was so damaging to the coalition as it made a counterattack impossible, and not only that, but thousands of gears were lost here as well, diminishing their numbers once again. On the 30th of that same month, another attack happened within Yanamont, a year after the first one on E-Day. Here the Locusts did the exact same thing as before and charged into the city, but this time there were surprisingly no gears here to help the civilians, leaving them fully on their own to try and fend for themselves, leaving many to die brutally. As the city burnt and the civilians died in their droves, Sergeant Phoenix and his squad heard about the surprise attack, went against their current orders and headed to the city to rescue any and all survivors as possible. Arriving on the scene, Phoenix and his squad would witness the Locusts butchering civilians within the general store and hunting them everywhere. Luckily they arrived just in time and were able to evacuate those fleeing the scene, whilst Marcus, Dominic Santiago and Private Ty Calisso went into the store to kill the Locust. During their battle, Phoenix's lancer jammed and a Locust was able to grab him, but Ty was able to flank the drone, get behind it and stabbed it with a chainsaw, tearing it into two. This action allowed for the COG to come up with their new technology of deploying all of the gears with lancers attached with a chainsaw bayonet, so they could take out any Locust at close quarters, once again created thanks to Adam Phoenix. At the end of this second battle of Yanamont, the Locusts sent in there were taken out by this small squadron, and all of the citizens started fleeing the city, worried that they would attack it again for a third time. On that same day, a city in South Tyrus named Andeas would also go on to fall completely overwhelmed and burnt down by the Locust horde again. This caused a problem as the evacuating citizens caused a major traffic jam on the way to the Jacinto Plateau, which in 3 days' time would become a massive problem. After abandoning the Austrian Republic, Yuri Jaschenko got a call from the new chairman Richard Prescott asking him to help strike at the Locust sinkholes using his country's store of chemical weapons. However, despite everything, Deschenko refused, saying it wouldn't make a difference at this point and they should save them for when it gets to the end game, believing these weapons would just go on to kill both humans and Locust. With that out of the question, Prescott had to come up with another plan, and here started the Fortification Act, and in a speech that the whole of Sera stated, "As all of Sera has learnt, peace is fragile. This new ruthless enemy has rendered Sera's leaders either helpless or dead. The coalition of ordered governments believes Sera is finished, being this sick, feeble animal waiting for slaughter. Today, citizens of Sera, we coalition, we take back our planet. To ensure your safety, cooperation, we are reinstating the Fortification Act. All of Sera will be under martial law. No one is exempt. Survivors should immediately start evacuating to Jacinto Plateau. These unclean creatures, these Locusts, are unable to penetrate Jacinto's granite base. Therefore, in Jacinto, we are safe." On top of that plan to get everyone to the Jacinto Plateau, which was becoming tricky thanks to the major traffic jams caused by the fall of Andius, Prescott also stated that within 3 days' time they would be launching the Hammer of Dawn strikes to take out the Locusts from the Cog's abandoned cities. Now that the Fortification Act was going forward, the Locusts took action as well as they attacked the retreating forces from the cities, ambushing Voslov Bridge by sending in at least 50 grubs at the drawbridge, killing all of the gears located there and looting all of their bodies and vehicles. Sergeant Phoenix, arriving at the bridge, witnessed what had happened there and improvised new tactics on taking them out. Ordering the drawbridge to be opened, all of the abandoned vehicles would go on to fall on the grubs there and would use a long spear on a fuel truck that blew them all up. Now that the grubs were dead, the highway was able to be opened once again for the remaining refugees. Then again, the ships with people in them could not make it down the river as it had now become fully blocked. Eventually, Jacinto became heavily populated, and that's an understatement. Jacinto became so populated that it had overcrowding problems with not many resources to keep everyone happy. But the most important thing was they were all safe, for now at least. On the 33rd of that same month, a new order for the Assassination of Ukkon was issued by the COG, which resulted in the events of the game Gears Tactics. Ukkon was the main target as he had been genetically altering and weaponizing indigenous creatures from the Hollow to be used as weapons for the Locust army, such as the Brumax and the Corpses. The order was given by Chairman Prescott to Sergeant Gabriel Diaz. This assassination order, however, was given on the same day as the Hammer of Dawn strikes. As both Sergeant Diaz and Private Redburn arrived in Embry Point to retrieve classified files in the CIC Aldair, the Hammer of Dawn strikes commenced, almost taking them out in the process. For the rest of Sera, everywhere was burnt alive apart from the Jacinto Plateau. Ashes rained throughout all of the atmosphere as anyone who got caught outside during the strike would be burnt to a crisp, which tragically included Hoffman's beloved wife. The environmental damage was beyond anything anyone had ever seen before. Anyone who wasn't in the Jacinto Plateau but did survive these strikes became known as the Stranded, trying to create their own settlements and just survive as best as they could. The strike was actually done by Prescott himself, who held both of the buttons at the same time, taking the burden off of anyone else from making their horrific call. All responsibility got passed to him. With the strikes over, Sergeant Diaz could go on to recruit anyone he wanted for the mission at hand, eventually forming the team of Major Sid Redburn, Dr. Michaela Dawn, and Reina Torres, basing themselves within a mining rig known as a Mammoth, owned by Michaela Dawn. Throughout the mission, this team would go through many fallouts, experience betrayals, dark secrets, and all of Ukkon's forces, are covering what really happened at New Hope, as well as Ukkon taking on Queen Mira's once lover in front of his daughter Reina, who now wanted to extract revenge. Eventually, they would meet with Ukkon face to face in his new labs, where he was creating new creatures for the Horde, and would meet his end, being hit with a cytostatic gas grenade and then shot in the head by Reina herself. Ukkon was dead, but during this mission the COG had tried to end them as well for discovering the secrets behind the Locust creation. Now this team were all just stranded and continued on fighting against the Locust and Ukkon's vile creations on their own. Obviously more happened during this operation over the month of Reap in the year 1 AE, but those are told extremely well in Gears Tactics, as I've mentioned before. In the month of 4 of that same year, the Battle of Oblivion, a cool sounding battle, took place. This battle was between a small Locust raiding party and the Stranded at the Oblivion Central Squatters camp within Tyrus. Seeing the Horde coming, the Stranded made sure to get all of the helpless women and children into a bunker, with the Stranded leader named Nicholas commanding their forces to set up their defenses. In this group consisted one Dizzy Wallin, who before E-Day was working within Halvo Bay, but after all of the attacks and the Hammer of Dawn strike, found himself based within this specific Stranded camp. The Stranded here in Oblivion were well fortified, and it paid off massively as they were able to hold off the drones sent in to attack them. Several Stranded were killed and wounded in the process, but those located within the bunker were able to live another day. Over in Jacinto at the same time, Kilo Squad under the leadership of Damon Baird would go on to break down whilst on patrol. Trying to repair the engine of their APC, the other gears would surround Baird to defend him in case any attack were to take place. Cole for one expected planted an ambush at any moment, but believed they were waiting for them to repair their APC before attacking so they could hijack it. As tensions rose, the rubble around them started to rumble, and immediately the gears started shooting the APC's gun at the source of the noise. However, that noise was actually a group of Stranded who were recycling in that area. With the Stranded who were almost killed by the team now gone, an E-hole opened up in front of their APC and a boomer attacked Cole, landing on top of him. Cole immediately got his chainsaw lancer going and aimed it at its crotch area, whilst the APC's guns opened fire on it. The boomer was taken down in glorious fashion, but drones appeared firing on them, forcing them to retreat in their now fixed APC. With Baird driving, he would go on to run over 3 of the drones and let Cole out to check on the Stranded. With Cole now absent from the vehicle, a single drone climbed on the top of the APC and tried to throw a grenade inside, but it missed and killed itself in the process. After returning to the vehicle, Cole confirmed that one of the Stranded had been killed within the skirmish. With that patrol of the live zone done, Kilo returned back to base, where they were going to find their COG General, Bardry Salaman, had committed suicide, and now Colonel Victor Hoffman had replaced him and was now in charge of the 26th Royal Terran Infantry. 4 years after the events in 5 AE, the Winter of Sorrow was to take place. More specifically, this month saw the fall of the city of Landown, which was seen to all within the COG as one of the lowest moments ever, with Tai Callisto seeing it as an extremely bad omen. When the fall first started, Locust forces only hit the city for the cargo trucks that had no escorts. They weren't large-scale attacks, they were just done to gather resources and technology. Eventually, the Locusts upped their efforts and launched a full-scale siege to the city. Knowing this was going to be a big attack, the mayor of Landown asked for reinforcements of gears to help them defend the city. As the attack went ahead, Locust forces attacked with mortar strikes utilizing nemesis and targeting trucks making their way in and out of the city, cutting off the COG's vital supplies, which they were already running low on at the time. Ultimately, it was their own fault, as they had not been protecting the convoys in the first place. With the COG struggling with resources, they could not handle this massive assault on the city, and as a result, it would fall to the Locusts and would turn into one of their own strongholds. Some refugees were able to escape from the city and report the attack, but as mentioned, reports of it happening in the media really hit people hard, with newspapers honouring one gear who did everything he could in the battle to save it, that being Sergeant Hudson Connors, who lost his life to the Horde. 4 years later, the Locusts would go on to hit another city hard, that being the city of Ilima. This attack saw the launch of the Krill Storm, where they blocked out the sun to allow the Krill to invade and take out everyone there. The COG were quickly sent into the city after hearing of their advances and to help evacuate citizens in what felt like the same situation happening over and over again. But this time that was the main focus, not wiping out the Locust forces. Luckily, before the Krill Storm had begun, the people of Ilima had been evacuated apart from a few checkpoints that were attacked by the Locust before. Despite some evacuations, every human who lived within the city was wiped out. Zeta 6, led by Min Young Kim, featuring Tai Callisto, Michael Barrick and Alicia Valera, were tasked in getting to the city and evacuating anyone who was left, with a young Jace Stratton being rescued and going on to state that his foster father, Dr. Gregory Wisson, had not been evacuated yet. Searching for the doctor, Zeta would find that he had gone to save children from an orphanage and evacuate them. Fighting through the many Horde forces, utilizing the Hammer of Dawn, they would soon find that they were the only gears left within Ilima and had only 20 minutes left before the evacuation was fully over. In the end, Zeta were able to successfully evacuate Dr. Wisson and the children from the orphanage, but at the price of some of their own gears, and surviving a head-on attack by General Ram himself, who almost got taken out by Lieutenant Kim, but hit back and sought revenge on this human who dared try to end him. With their evacuation done, Ilima would be then lost to the Locusts as the Krill Storm enveloped the city and killed everyone left. This loss of Ilima City would have dramatic effects as it gave the Locusts a place to reinforce themselves and set up their next target, the capital of Tyrus, Ephyra. For the COG, Chairman Prescott would go on to issue a new initiative known as Operation Lifeboat, which was a way to try and recruit all Stranded into the COG forces, essentially manipulating them into thinking they had to or they will lose everything. And because of it, more troops were being added to the COG's forces, including some Stranded like Dizzy Wallin and Michael Barrick. That following following year in 10 AE, the Locusts did what they planned to do as they launched their attack on Ephyra, the Cog's capital. Digging their way past the rocks of the plateau, the Locusts were quick to overwhelm the city. The Cog were not quick to act, as they believed the Locusts would have to go across open land to get to the city. Little did they know that they had breached the unused and unmonitored metro stations running through Ephyra. This allowed them to breach the city without being detected by CCTV, as the Gears hadn't set up any in the stations. This Locust force consisted of around 10,000 grubs, numerous reavers, corpses, and brumacs, making it one of the biggest forces the Cog had ever seen. How they didn't see them coming is another story itself. Eventually the Cog engaged in battle with them in one of the bloodiest battles they had ever been in, but eventually they would have to fall back to the Chancery Bridge as the Locusts were pushing them too hard. Marcus Phoenix, who was here during the battle, received a distress call during this point from his father, Adam Phoenix, and without hesitation took Dom Santiago to Haldane Hall to look for him. However, what made matters worse for the Cog was that Phoenix took with him the targeting optic and left the rest of the targeting device at the Chancery Bridge. Because of this action, the Hammer of Dawn could not be used as its targeting device was inoperable. Whilst Marcus searched for his father, the other Cog forces at the bridge knew they had to blow it up some other way, with Hoffman personally going to the bridge to destroy it with a laser, trying to just use it without the optic. But by this point, it was too late. The Locusts could not be stopped, and destroying the bridge just meant they could not get more reinforcements. Reaching the Phoenix estate, Marcus and Dom both fought off the Locust forces trying to get to Adam, but in the chaos of everything, Marcus would witness a building collapse on top of his father, believing that it had killed him then and there. With the southern half of Ephyra now fully under Locust control, the Cog's political hotspot was gone, with Locusts inhabiting buildings such as the House of Sovereigns. Luckily for the Cog, the city population would be evacuated, but they were now extremely vulnerable to another attack, an attack on their last city of Jacinto, and would have to really up their effort if they were to continue to exist. As Marcus returned back to base, he was arrested and was put on trial for cowardice for abandoning his post and allowing the Locusts to take part of Ephyra. The initial sentence was to be executed, but because of his exemplary 2 tours of duty within the Pendulum Wars and Dom testifying in his favour, he was let off being sentenced to death. Prescott also intervened, knowing secretly that Adam Phoenix was still alive and wanted him to stay happy as he worked on the solution for the Lambent pandemic and getting rid of the Locusts, and with that helped Phoenix get out of his death sentence. Instead, Marcus was sentenced to 40 years of imprisonment in the Slab, the Cog's most infamous prison, while Santiago's loyalty to the Cog was questioned by his superiors for his decision to defend Phoenix. After the trial, all of the Cog soldiers who were loyal to Phoenix, such as Dom, Anya Stroud, Jace Stratton, and Ty Caliso, would work every chance they could to help Marcus get out of prison, knowing he was too good a gear to be locked up. But this plan would take over 4 years to complete. During the start of the year 14 AE within the month of Storm, Operation Midnight would take place at the Pharaoh Bridge in Tyrus. The plan was simple: take Pharaoh Bridge so that a convoy could cross over it. When Midnight Squad arrived, they simply waited there ready for the Locusts to try and take the bridge, but as they waited a while, they reported that there were no Locust activity at all. As Lieutenant Draper contacted their drivers to see if they had spotted anything, they were greeted with nothing but silence. The Locusts had killed them. Suddenly, the other men came under fire from Tickers, who ambushed them out of nowhere. Draper and Private Jace Stratton then came under fire from a squadron of Theron guards, led by General Ram. As the team facing the Tickers finished them off, making sure they didn't explode, they went to reinforce Draper and Jack. During all of this, one gear named Rufus would be hit by a torque bow bolt, which exploded and killed him instantly. Jace also had a torque bow bolt go off near him, which went on to blow off half of his left ear. As the team linked up, they would go on to kill some of the Therons, but it looked like it was over for them as they were surrounded. But luck was on their side as 4 King Ravens arrived and opened fire on Ram and his Locust forces, killing all of them except Ram himself, who escaped by jumping into the river. After that encounter, Takashi, who had fallen off of the bridge and was hanging on for dear life, was rescued, and all of them returned back to base after successfully allowing the convoy over the bridge, meaning Operation Midnight was an overall success. On the 11th of Gale in 14 AE, Colonel Hoffman released an official pardon for all of the criminals at the Jacinto Maximum Security Prison and brought them into the military, except for one, Marcus Phoenix, who was left there to rot. Luckily for him, Dom was able to break him out at the same time that the Locust started hitting and overthrowing the whole of the slab, bringing Marcus right back into the action. With Marcus now back within the cog ranks, Hoffman would be furious to see his face once again, but there was no time to argue. The light mass offensive was fully in action now, and Marcus and his Delta Squad had to get it done. Over that one day, Delta Squad would go on to fight through the Locust and eventually would achieve their goal of setting off the light mass bomb within the outer hollow, also taking out General Ram in the process as well, although they would go on to lose many good gears in the meantime, with two being Anthony Carmine and Lieutenant Min-Young Kim. With the outer hollow now destroyed and Urzil Ram killed as well, for many of the gears they thought that would be the turning point of the war in their favour, but unfortunately things were to get worse as the Locusts upped their efforts. The first counterattack happened that same year, where the cities of Tolan and Montevado would be sunk in response to the light mass offensive. Here the Locusts would awaken a giant riftworm thanks to their priest named Scourge and use it to fully destroy the last human strongholds in an attempt to surround Jacinto City, and with it the last of the Cog and the Lambent as well. Despite some smaller forces now, the Locusts hit both of the cities of Montevado and Tolan and would ultimately go on to sink both of them utilizing their new giant worm weapon. Delta Squad, who were currently on a rescue mission to find a lone survivor from Echo 6 within the Pirna Badlands, would go on to find out it was a trap and would be ambushed, go on to lose one of their best known as Gil Gonzalez, who would be taken out by a drone sniper. Eventually the squad would get out of there and get back to Jacinto City, where they would be redirected towards Montevado. But that mission they had just been on certainly shocked Delta, especially Dom, who couldn't stop thinking about Maria and how much he missed her. Now in Montevado, Delta would go on to be shot down by a Cedar, and then after eventually reaching their destination would also go on to be attacked by a Brumac. Ultimately the city was a death trap, as one stranded would state, but Delta were able to get out of there before it fully went, saving only a few stranded, whilst also losing multiple cog forces and one King Raven. Despite this, High Command would still believe the war was dying down now and they were winning, but the Locust was still hitting places, just in smaller numbers now, as Delta Squad reported. Cog even started reporting that stranded were going on to live regular lives now because the attacks were dying down, and maybe things were going back to normal after E-Day. Despite that, the Cog started to fully evacuate everyone from Anvil Gate and started loading every stranded member in their trucks to once again get to Jacinto City. As that was happening, Anya would go on a scout mission and discover a group of 20 Locust drones. Telling Colonel Hoffman about this, she would take Delta 1 to take them out along with Hoffman. During this small skirmish, Hoffman would be injured within it, but it wasn't life-threatening, only being shot in the calf. The Cog continued to get ready to leave for Jacinto, but with everything they couldn't take, they would destroy what was part of the Scorched Earth policy to make sure the Locust couldn't benefit from anything, but also to force the stranded into joining the Cog through Operation Lifeboat. As the Locust got closer to the gears, including Hoffman, they would try their hardest to see them off, but most of the gears fighting were around the age of 60 years old. As the convoy with the stranded started to leave, one of the APCs would go on to be taken out and an explosion would happen on Hoffman's APC as he and Ty would be scouting a nearby street. With their APC out of action, the two would almost be killed in an unexpected attack, but luckily would be rescued by Dom and Marcus after they were alerted to what was happening by Anya. The journey back was horrific and many were lost in the process, but luckily they made it back to Jacinto City and were met with a hero's welcome from the local population, which really helped with the overall morale. Despite them surviving all of this, Ty would go on to go back for the supplies left on the destroyed truck, as well as the remains of the gears and the civilians lost in the attack. After this evacuation, rumors spread all over Jacinto that the war had been won and the Locusts were fully defeated, but that was all to stop when seismic activity started happening within Tolan and Delta 1 was sent on yet another recon mission in that city now. Once again, Scourge had attacked the city with the Riftworm, and by the time the Cog could act, the surface was completely unstable. The Locusts followed this up with yet another attack, forcing Sergeant John Jakubowski and his squad to fall back to a gas station to try and hold off the many forces. With two of the gears being killed in this, Sergeant Jakubowski ordered a Hammer of Dawn strike on their location, which would kill all of the gears, but would stop the Locust forces advancing on their location. Eventually, the Riftworm had removed so much of the ground underneath that a massive sinkhole formed formed in the middle of the city, and the buildings in the middle were completely gone, and the city was fully destroyed in just 18 seconds. With that, the Locusts entered in full force, killing all in their way and capturing many stranded as well. As the city got worse, flooding started to sweep through the streets as well, and for a few stranded, they were able to send a distress signal to Jacinto City about what was happening before they went on to drown. Eventually, Delta One made it to the scene after receiving their orders from HQ, only to find that the city was now a giant sinkhole filled with tons of water, and there was no survivors anywhere to be found. Within the Tolan Dam itself, this would go on to be seen as an utter disaster for the cog and was covered up massively. Essentially, the cog would go on to reinforce this facility to make sure the Locusts didn't cut off the power that this plant was creating. However, the Locusts saw this and changed up their plans. Instead of attacking it head on, they just decided to surround it and cut off the soldiers from any further supplies, hoping that in the end they would just starve to death. This worked for the Locusts, as the soldiers within started running out of food very fast and were desperate for some form of aid. After a few weeks of this siege, COG's headquarters sent in a relief force of Delta One led by Marcus Phoenix to try and save the COG soldiers. After tons of heavy fighting where they would lose a King Raven in the process, Phoenix knew this was not to be a success and had to pull out of the rescue attempt, leaving behind all of the starving gears to a horrific fate as the Locusts finally rushed in and killed all of its defenders. Seeing the reports of a Locust victory and power outages all over the region, the COG High Command relocated all from the city of Speyer into Ilima City for new jobs, destroying the Speyer metalworks industry completely. With that, they also claimed it was only a few dozen gears lost in this attack, but in reality, that number was far higher. With those cities gone, Jacinto Plateau was extremely weak and next on the attack list for the Locusts, especially Jacinto City. But luckily for the COG, this city was still pretty impenetrable. But with that, Queen Mira and Scourge continued attacking all cities near it and taking all COG resources along the way, cutting off their food supply at the North Gate agricultural depot, as well as the COG's birthing creche in Gelane, where the population's children were located. As this city was cut off from COG support, the women and children here had to fend for themselves, but they were cut down massively. Those who survived formed a bitter hatred for the COG, seeing themselves as just slaves for them, and formed the Grievous Bodily Love faction, which would fight against the Locust on their own. As a beacon was set off before this, however, the COG eventually showed up, including Sergeant Phoenix and the rest of Delta Squad, who were now on a rescue mission for those who had survived what was named as the Gelane Massacre. Meeting with this group, the GBL did not want to rejoin the COG, believing that was a terrible thing for their society. However, with the Locust attacks getting stronger, they had to do something and work together. Ultimately, after many disagreements along the way, the COG were able to save the remaining survivors from the Gelane Massacre and brought a ton of fertile women and children back with them that could become battle ready within just a few years. Granted, humanity had lost another city, but what they got in these women and children was a big tactical victory for them, and something that would help them going into the later years of this very war. By the month of Harvest in 14 AE, the Locust Horde were finally ready to start their attack on the city of Jacinto, and with it came the events of Gears of War 2. The COG realized the Locusts were far from defeated, and they now had to work out a way to hit them where it hurt them the most, their home city, wherever that might be. Delta Squad led by Phoenix would once again hit back against the Locusts, fending off Jacinto City before venturing across open land and reaching land down, plunging down into the Locusts' home to find their queen, as well as what they were using to sink humanity's cities. Here they were going to witness that they were sinking cities with a giant worm, before being eaten alive and destroying the Riftworm from within. However, in the process would lose the city of Ilima for good, as it would be destroyed by that said worm before Phoenix and his squad took it out. Not long after, Marcus's squad would also witness the horrors within the New Hope research facility, whilst being told it was completely confidential once again, before finally making it to the main city of the Locusts, Nexus, under the Kadar Mountains, and coming face to face with not only Scourge, but Queen Mira herself. But along the way, Dom would finally find where Maria had gone, and what the Locust had done to her, and many other captured individuals as well. Tragically, after months of searching, Dom would say goodbye to his childhood sweetheart as her withered body clung on to the last remnants of life. Dom, doing the humane thing, would put her out of her pain, pledging to take each and every one of the Locusts out in his final attack on their home. With Queen Mira and Scourge escaping from Phoenix and his squad, it was time for the cog to get back to Jacinto and sink it for good, to wipe out the Locust, but also all of the Lambent forces that Delta had now witnessed fighting the Locust down in Nexus. With that, the cog evacuated everyone again and took everyone to the icy wilderness of Port Farrell, within the northern Tiris coast that had been abandoned in 1 AE. Eventually, Phoenix and his squad would successfully sink the whole of Jacinto City, taking out the whole of Nexus and believing they had taken all of the Locust once again. But unfortunately, the Lambent had grown too much in this time and was evolving into a new state, one that the cog would have to try and fight back against in some way. By the month of Thor, the cog had fully relocated to the Vectes naval base on the island of Vectes, with Chairman Prescott hoping to turn the island into a new Jacinto City. However, this did not sit right with the native population of Stranded, who hated seeing the cog invade their land. A year later, in 15 AE, during the month of Storm, a Stranded insurgency started after a group led by a man named Massey attacked the cog-controlled town Pelluran. However, this did not last long, as they were ill-equipped to take on the Gears, and despite taking out a few of them, would lose Massey in the process. This didn't stop attacks, however, as small raids took place all over the island, and now suddenly, the cog had to deal with resources being stolen from them as pirate gangs attacked all over Vectes. The attacks suddenly came to an end, however, as the Lambent rose from underground and surrounded the whole of Vectes, attacking everything around them. This forced the Stranded into dropping their attacks and focusing on the Lambent and helping the cog survive. But whilst the attacks were happening against the Lambent, Chairman Prescott would unexpectedly, without any reason, abandon Vectes as well as the cog and make the whole of the coalition completely collapse, making everyone essentially a stranded soldier. By the month of Bloom, it was confirmed that the coalition was fully disbanded thanks to Prescott's abandonment, with many believing he had died and others believing he was just selfish and didn't care for his people. The truth was, he was heading back to Azura to hand over a sample of the Lambent to Adam Phoenix, but without telling anyone else. Marcus would call him a coward as he flew off to the dirty little secret island, however. For the now stranded civilians, Gears and pretty much everyone left on Sera, they would revert into small groups of survivalists only looking out for themselves, as the Lambent were becoming a bigger threat and Sera was quickly dying to them. For 2 years, this was the norm for humanity, as they just tried to get on with their day-to-day, scavenging for resources and looking for safe places to set up their home. For a lot of the Gears who had been abandoned by the cog, they would set themselves up on the Raven's Nest helicopter carrier known as the CNV Sovereign, making it their home as they ventured around the island of Vectes. On board included Marcus Phoenix, Dom, Stroud and their commander Quentin Michelson. Over in Azura, Queen Mira and her Locust forces would launch a full-scale attack on the secret facility used for making weapons and things to help humanity. Getting here, Mira would go on to kill every civilian and scientist located there, apart from Adam Phoenix and Chairman Prescott and his 2 bodyguards, the latter being able to escape from her attack. Mira kept Adam alive to force him to work on the emulsion countermeasure weapon and making the Locust immune from it. Before Prescott was able to escape, however, he would be given a data disk to give to Marcus, which would explain everything that had happened. Reluctantly, Prescott agreed to find Marcus and hand him the data disk. Eventually, Prescott would find the ship, however it would go on to be destroyed by the Locusts, as the crew were not only hit by ground forces, but also a giant Lambent Leviathan. Just before this battle, Prescott would hand over vital information to Marcus about his father, who was still alive and working for him, now trapped within Azura. The attack, however, was so devastating that both Prescott and Quentin would go on to be killed, leaving Marcus and the rest of Delta Squad looking for his father once again, thanks to the evidence he was given before Prescott went on to die. Ultimately, this is where Gears of War 3 would begin, and the final war against the Lambent and the Locust would take place, as Marcus and his Delta Squad would finally get to Azura and find his father again. That said, not all made it to Azura. Dom sacrificed his life to save his fellow Gears and would join his childhood sweetheart of Maria wherever she might be now. Now getting to Azura and Marcus being reunited with his father once again, Adam told Marcus of a way to wipe out all of the Lambent and Locusts in the same process, utilizing his countermeasure once again and going against Queen Mira's want for an immunity for her forces. Taking out Queen Mira in this final grand battle, the countermeasure would then go on to be launched and would detonate, spreading a massive blast all over Sera that would not only wipe out the Lambent but the Locust as well, well, who had been born to the emulsion and had it in their veins. Victory was theirs, but it came at a big cost. To speed up this process of making the weapon, Adam had injected himself with the parasite to see how it worked and evolved. In a final heartfelt moment, Adam would say goodbye to his beloved son, who didn't want to lose his father once again, but Adam would go on to ask him to go and live for him. With that, a pulse of the weapon activated again, and Adam's body crumbled into ashes, and with his death, the end of the Locust and Lambent War came to an official end in the month of Bloom, 17 AE. Those located out at Anvil Gates who were fighting off the mass load of Locust forces were saved by this blast, and once again, the Anvil Gate was saved. Now with the war finally over and most of the Locusts being wiped out and having no leader, the coalition of ordered governments would reform once again and begin the process of electing a new leader, also going on to start the plans and construction of their new main city, which would be named New Ephyra, located on the old ruins of Old Ephyra. At first, when the construction was beginning, this area was just a large encampment managed by the surviving COG personnel, which included Anya Stroud. The future First Minister, Mina Jin, during this time was still living as a stranded near the area, and when she went on to meet with Stroud for the first time, would go on to be mentored by her and invited to live within this large encampment. By the month of Storm in 18 AE, the COG forces would go out hunting for the remaining Locust survivors living out within Sera and would wipe them out, taking all of their bodies, most of them being encased in crystallized shells thanks to the emulsion countermeasure weapon, and were going to be dumped in mass graves all across Sera. By 20 AE, Anya Stroud had become the new First Minister of the COG and had become close to Mina Jin and her family. Initially, Jin really disliked Stroud, most likely due to the COG ties and how most stranded societies did not want them to reform, but as she would get to know her more, she became close friends with her. Embracing the new COG, Stroud and Jin would make sure it was filled with young, talented people to make it new and refreshing, so that others would be extremely inspired to follow their way. They would also go on to disable the Hammer of Dawn completely, after Anya and many others in command had witnessed the horror it brought upon the world, as well as its people. At this point in time, Jin would be in her mid-20s and would become the new head of the Ministry of Procreation, which was one of the most crucial roles in all of the new coalition. Thanks to her efforts in this role, Jin was able to allow a once infertile Anya Stroud to conceive a child, James Dominic Phoenix, with her husband, Sergeant Marcus Phoenix, who had tied the knot after the end of the Locust War. Stroud became one of the first to undergo this new fertility program and inspired many others to do it as well. As James Phoenix was born, Del Walker, Kate Diaz and Fars Shutani would be born within that same year, as humanity went on a new big goal of trying to repopulate the planet and boost their numbers once again. Whilst JD, Del and Fars would be all part of the fertility program of the COG, Kate would be born as an outsider, a more derogatory word for stranded that did not go back to the COG, despite having past links with the COG thanks to her father, Gabriel Diaz, and now lived out with her father and mother Raina within Fort Umson, which formed again after the end of the war. 2 years after this, in 22 AE, in the month of Bloom, the COG continued to build up their surroundings as they created a full-on walled settlement for people to live within that would be named as Settlement 2, and with its construction would see a ton of survivors populate it, hoping to go back to a form of normality. With its creation within the month of Bloom, this day would forever go on to be known as Settlers' Day and would be a holiday for all to celebrate, linked with a film festival called Festival of Cinema. Other settlements were created during this time, with Settlement 1 being around now as well, but there is no recorded date of when it was officially constructed. But I'd imagine it would be around the same time as Settlement 2, and logic dictates it would have been the first one. By 21 AE, all looked like it was going amazingly well for the new COG. They were growing in strength with settlements forming all over. New Ephyra was pretty much fully constructed by this point, and the new fertility program was helping society grow. It was to some extent a new golden age, even if the COG had lost a lot of citizens who wanted to simply be outsiders by this point. However, despite all of the good work Anya Stroud was doing for the COG as their first minister, she would tragically die here, as she would go on to try and have a second child in the fertility program. It is unknown what the cause of her death death was, but it was tragic for all of the people of the cog and even outside of it. Anya had served her planet well over the years, and for her husband Marcus, he would be the most devastated of them all, taking her body back to the Stroud estate and burying her there, which would annoy Jin, who wanted Anya's body to be the symbol of inspiration for the next generation. For Marcus, he didn't care and just wanted her to go back home and be at rest. Her death really kicked off Marcus's severe depression as he fully isolated himself from everyone, which included Damon Baird, Samantha Byrne, and Cole. His relationship with JD also took a nosedive as JD would resent his father for never being present or talking to him about what happened with his mother's death. With that, the cog went on to find a new first minister, which went on to be a man named Dyer, whose whole goal as a leader was to rebuild human civilization by continuing the construction of new settlements. That said, Dyer was more of an authoritarian leader who was not liked by a lot within the cog. In the year of 30 AE, Gabriel Diaz, who had been suffering with rust lung that he had caught at some point during the last few years of the war, would finally succumb to it this year and die within Fort Umson, leaving them now without a leader. Before his death, Gabriel requested his brother Oscar see him in the last few moments as he would be surrounded by his close family, and to also be second in command following Rayna's leadership, and to be a father figure to Kate. Eventually, after a few months on his deathbed, Gabriel would go on to die, but his brother Oscar would arrive too late and not be able to say a final goodbye to him. Kate during all of this was sadly too young to remember her father's death, and despite trying with all her might, would not remember what he was like as a father. The only thing she would do to bring back memories of him would be by reading an instruction manual for King Ravens, which he had authored himself. That following year, JD and Dale would all go on to graduate from their boarding schools after forming a close relationship with each other. Here the two would then decide to both sign up to the Coalition of Ordered Government's army and become Gears. Marcus, knowing full well what the cog were capable of and the secrets that they had hidden from him during his time within them, as well as all of the new stuff they were doing, objected massively to JD joining the new cog, stating they had become extremely authoritarian since the death of his wife. But this argument was the final straw for JD, as he would finally decide to leave home, not wanting to know his father anymore, with Marcus disowning him as well. With JD leaving his father to sulk in his estate on his own, he and Dell would sign up for the officer training program, with both of them reaching the rank of second lieutenant, being trained by Chief Sergeant Clayton Carmine. During their time here, they would also go on to meet with Fuzz, who would constantly pick on both JD and Dell to try and prove that he was better in all areas than those two, and actually the best in the academy, leading to a fierce rivalry between the two parties. At the same time, JD and Dell would also befriend Corporal Elizabeth Carmine, the niece of Clayton, who was seen as the best driver in the cog army. That following year, all four of the cadets would go on to graduate into the army and were ready to prove themselves in whatever their first minister needed them to do. By this point in time, Dyer had been dropped as the first minister, as Mini Jin would be elected by those around her to run the new cog. Jin followed in suit of Dyer, however, focusing on the outsiders and how they were seen as extremely problematic to their cause. Here she would take a ton of robots known as DBs, which were originally simple construction and civil workers, and turn them into a mechanized police force, which their creator, Damon Baird, who was now the CEO of the DB Industries, objected to massively, and thus created a rift between those two. This new police force coming into action also forced a lot of citizens to turn their backs on the cog, seeing Jin as a minister of real totalitarian government and totally against everything Anya Stroud ran for. This came to the forefront within the year of 41 AE, when citizens of Settlement 2 became more infuriated with Minister Jin's leadership and led a protest to allow Settlement 2 autonomy from New Ephyra. Seeing a couple of fresh-faced Gears leaving the academy in both JD and Dell, Minister Jin selected them to lead a unit of security DBs in Settlement 2. With the protests happening, Gears and DBs were sent into the area to silence the protesters, but seeing the police force being brought in to silence them turned the protests into violent ones, and with that, Lieutenant James Phoenix was given the order from the minister herself to eliminate the violent protesters. At least, that was the official story given by Minister Jin herself. Whether she actually ordered him to open fire is still up for debate. Despite that, with things getting more chaotic by the minute, Phoenix got the DBs to open fire on the citizens, which would cause an event that would shock everyone, known as the Settlement Settlement 2 protest massacre. Fars during this also commanded his DBs to open fire, but Del would keep his squad under control, being horrified about what was going on, believing it was Fars who had given the order to first open fire on all of them. Hundreds of civilians would be killed in this event, with the COG who took part in it claiming they had to do it as their lives were being threatened, and justified it every chance they could. This whole event, however, caused an even bigger rift to form between the COG and the Outsiders, as some of them were even ready to go to war against Minister Jin's forces. The White Xanthium, for example, would be a heavily anti-COG group that would distribute pamphlets all over Settlement 2 after the massacre. The White Xanthium being a flower that was the favourite of First Minister Anya Stroud, a leader they believed in, and wanted a similar leader to go back into the COG hierarchy. For Dale Walker, after this event, he would find it extremely hard to believe fully in the COG's cause, and did not want to be a Gear anymore because of this event. Speaking openly to Phoenix, the two considered leaving the COG for good, with Phoenix not telling Dale what had truly happened within Settlement 2. With that, JD went to see Marcus to question what he should do in this situation, still having some form of respect for him. Marcus would go on to state that they should not become an outsider, as the COG would hunt them down. JD, however, disagreed, believing the new COG wouldn't do that to those who had served them, and sided with Del, quitting the COG for good and setting up his new life as an outsider. As the two left the Stroud estate, JD and Del would go on to leave their gear armor behind and travel to the village of Fort Umpson to start anew, meeting with Kate Diaz and forming a new friendship with her despite her mother's objection to letting in former COG soldiers. This is where the events of Gears of War 4 takes place, as the Outsiders start losing individuals, believing it was the COG capturing them. In reality, in the year of 42 AE, the Locust hive mind would be reactivated with Mira's consciousness, as well as the matriarch within the Mount Kadar facility, and would guide the Scions into a new life known as the Swarm, which would go on to form itself in grand numbers in the numerous Locust burial sites all over Sera. JD, Del, Kate and Marcus would go on to witness these new creatures and where they were coming from after they had attacked the fort and taken with them Mira's daughter and Kate's mother, Reyna, to try and make her the new queen for them, and worst of all, would destroy Marcus Phoenix's tomatoes in the process. Eventually, the team would go on to locate Kate's mother, who had been converted by the Swarm, and in a final goodbye, Kate would be given Mira's amulets that Reyna had recovered when fighting Ukkon, and after that euthanized her mother to free her from the Swarm's control. But unfortunately, Kate hadn't actually finished the job, as her mother continued to live on, or at least her consciousness did anyway, but just separate from the hive mind. With Reyna unable to be infected by the new queen, the hive mind and Queen Mira looked at their next option, that being the next in line, which was of course Kate. Here Mira started to hit Kate with regular hallucinations, driving her mad and causing her to go many days without sleep, only seeing horrible things of the future. Despite the hallucinations, Kate and her team, who had now been welcomed back into the COG to fight back against the new threat of the Swarm, would go on secret missions for Baird to try and get the Hammer of Dawn back up and running in case the need arose, with the team being sent back into the old Azura Island to launch a satellite for it. This went against the Minister once again, who was furious at their actions but ultimately let them off the hook as they were needed to fight off the Swarm in Settlement 2. This of course would lead into the events of Gears 5, where Kate, who had formed a bitterness to JD after finding out about his actions in Settlement 2, would go looking for answers regarding her hallucinations, whilst also losing her uncle during a Swarm invasion where she would seemingly take control of the Swarm and deal the killing blow to him. With her seeking this information, the two would not only venture to the New Hope facility to witness the horrors within and see the end of Niles' AI there, but also the extremely hidden away bunker under Mount Kadar, where Niles would proudly show off his creations and reveal who her grandmother really was. With her seeing all of this, Niles would link her with the matriarch, triggering the Locust to come back into full action, waking Reyna's consciousness to be their new queen once again. This was possible as Niles had tricked her into thinking the machine would stop Kate from becoming the new queen and remove her link to the hive mind, but instead only triggered the resurrection process for Reyna. Being taken out of the machine and taking out the matriarch who had broken free from containment, Kate realized they had to stop the Swarm by killing the queen, which she confirmed was now her mother, and the only way of taking them out was by reactivating the Hammer of Dawn. Traveling to Vazgar with that mission, Kate and Del would be reunited with JD and Fars and would go on to acquire targeting beacons to help control the the Hammer of Dawn, and on top of that take out a gigantic swarm creature known as the Kraken. Finally making it back to New Ephyra, Minister Jin would attempt to arrest Kate to try and connect her to the hive mind to locate the central hive so that the cog could destroy it and the swarm in turn. However, before she could do that, the swarm attacked in their masses and sent forward their Kraken once again, stopping the squad from launching the Hammer of Dawn by destroying the targeting beacons. Eventually the squad's robotic companion known as Jack would sacrifice itself to use itself as a targeting beacon for the hammer and use it to kill the Kraken once and for all. With the Kraken wiped out, New Ephyra had been saved from their attacks, but many gears and civilians would be lost in the process. With that, Marcus would warn Kate that Reyna would be back and the war is not over yet, but now they have a good chance to hit them hard. Kate would end that story by saying they will find her first, and discarded her mother's Locust necklace, ready for the final battle against the swarm and her mother. Whilst this massive attack was happening within New Ephyra, Colonel Hoffman, after Kate had gone on a second mission into the New Hope research facility, would go on to launch a new operation known as Operation HiveBuster, after he had gathered a sample of the deadly gas Niall Sampson's AI had used to cleanse the facility, and believed that with the help of Dr. Hannah Cole, could use it to destroy the entire swarm hives. Initially, Minister Jin disagreed with Hoffman's plan, stating her DBs could do it instead of risking Gear's lives, and with that forced Hoffman into full retirement. Not taking this, Hoffman launched the HiveBuster offensive as a rogue operation with the secret help of Major Donald Mathiasson and Dr. Hannah. With this, Mathiasson brought together Corporal Jeremiah Keegan, Lieutenant Lainey Calisso, and outsider Leslie McAllister as his HiveBusters team, as they would be promised rewards in exchange. The first HiveBust ended extremely badly as Mac detonated Team Scorpio's Venom Bomb too early, but it did give them information that this bomb didn't work on larger swarm forces such as Snatchers and Wardens. During their travels, the group would witness a creature taking down the swarm on an island with a deadly acidic venom, and with that, Team Scorpio sought it out, finding that the bird-like creature was called Wakatu. During this same time, the whole team would go on to find out that Hoffman's full operation was a rogue one and they had been lied to. But despite that, Team Scorpio and Dr. Hannah wanted to keep going with it as they felt like they were nearing success. Launching their next operation, the team would go on into the Wakatu's nest and gather a sample of the creature's venom after battling with it. Now with the gas and venom, Hannah was able to create a brand new weapon that was highly effective against the swarm now, and with this new weapon in their hands, Mac planned that the team would get captured by Snatchers and taken into the heart of the hive on the island. Utilizing some adrenaline injectors created by Hannah, the team would escape their pods and were going to successfully destroy the hive. With that mission a success and out of the way, Hoffman offered Mac a new one, a hive bust in his home village of Bravel, offering to find him a new team. However, Lainey and Keegan volunteered to be a part of it and continued working together, once again destroying the hive located there. In the process of this one, however, the team came to the conclusion that destroying a swarm hive did not destroy all of the swarm connected to it, but despite that, it did not stop the team from continuing their missions and taking on as many swarm hives as they possibly could. What the future of the world of Sera has next, we will have to wait and see. The swarm are still out there, and despite the actions of the HiveBusters and Delta Squad, they are growing in numbers every second, and with their Queen of Reyna now active, roaming out there somewhere, they are more deadlier than ever. Under the guidance of Marcus Phoenix and the other gears, the cog and all of the people of Sera will most likely prevail, but how they do it will be a story for another day. For now though, this has been the full timeline of events from the Gears of War universe, starting from the date of around 5000 BE and ending in the year of 42 or 43 AE during the height of the Swarm invasion. That ends a massive timeline video of the Gears of War universe, probably the biggest video I have ever made, and wow, there was a lot going on within it. With some stories I just had to cut down, otherwise the video would have been over 10 hours long. But I gotta say, it was an absolute joy to make, as I loved playing through the games again, especially the original trilogy. Those games are just so much fun. If you haven't played them, you really have to. But if you did make it to this part of the video, I want to say a massive thank you for watching it, and do let me know what you thought of it in the comments below, and please do share it around, give it a like and subscribe, as it helps this channel massively. A huge thank you to my patrons for allowing me to take the time to make this video as well, such as my small fishes, my big fishes Greg and Noxvox, my YouTube channel Wise One, Sith Lord 906, Video Gamer 75, and RIP City, my sharks Alfred Correa, Jason X117 and Nia Park, and my megalodons Sinus, Bear Clams 83 and Hazy Thoughts. But that is all for now. Thank you so much again for watching all of this video, and until the next one, I'll see you there. Cheers, my gears.